New York City never sleeps, but on a winter night like this, even its relentless pace seems to slow down. On the granite-paved streets, the pale yellow glow of streetlights casts long shadows onto the sidewalks. The distant sound of car horns blends with the howling wind that snakes through towering buildings. Under the Manhattan Bridge, a man sat hunched against the cold, unyielding concrete wall. Henry, or rather, Elliot Graves, once among the richest men in America, was now but a shadow of his former self. Henry bent forward, pulling his tattered coat tightly around his frail frame to ward off the biting cold. In front of him sat a plastic cup with a few meager coins dropped in by passers-by. Yet, for the most part, they walked past him as if he didn't exist. An invisible man in a crowded city, Henry thought, his cracked lips curling into a bitter smile. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the cold, but the darkness only summoned memories from his past. He remembered lavish parties where expensive wine flowed like rivers, and laughter echoed in opulent halls. He remembered meetings where dozens of people bowed to his every word, hoping to gain his favor. Yet, in those very rooms, he had made ruthless decisions, repossessing land, cutting jobs, and leaving hundreds of families in despair. "I used to think that was the only way to succeed," he muttered, his hoarse voice dissolving into the wind. Now it was all gone. Financial collapse and poor decisions had swept away his fortune. Friends had disappeared, family had turned their backs, and Henry, the king of the financial world, was now homeless, nameless and hopeless. A soft footstep echoed on the sidewalk, pulling Henry out of his reverie. He looked up, his weary eyes meeting the figure of a young woman approaching him. Emma, with a vibrant red scarf that stood out in the night, knelt beside him. In her hands was a small paper bag. "Are you hungry? I brought you a sandwich," she said, her voice gentle yet sincere. Henry stared at her for a long moment, as if doubting someone could truly care. After a few seconds, he nodded slightly. "Thank you." Emma smiled and placed the bag in front of him. She sat down beside him, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. "Have you been here long?" she asked, her tone light but clear. Henry shrugged. "Long enough to know that no one cares." Emma gazed at him, a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "That's not true. I care." Henry chuckled softly, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're the first person in months to stop and talk to me. Why?" Emma looked down at her hands, her voice lowering. "I had an uncle who ended up in a situation like yours. But I wasn't there in time to help him. I don't want to make that mistake again." Henry remained silent. Emma's words stirred a faint warmth within him, a feeling he hadn't known in a long time. Emma stood, brushing dust off her skirt. "Take care of yourself, I'll bring you more food tomorrow." Henry looked up at her, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Emma." "Right." She nodded, smiling. "That's right, and I'm glad to know your name." Henry hesitated for a moment before replying. "Henry." Emma smiled again before walking away, her red scarf fluttering in the wind. Henry watched her go, a strange sensation stirring in his chest, a little warmth, a flicker of hope. Under New York's frigid sky, Henry thought to himself, maybe the world isn't as cruel as I once believed. Late at night beneath the Manhattan Bridge, the dim glow of streetlights illuminated the damp street corner. Henry remained slumped against the cold, unyielding wall. The paper bag Emma had left lay on his lap. Inside was a sandwich, but Henry didn't eat it right away. He held it in his hands, staring at it as though he were holding a fragment of a long-lost memory. The wind howled, icy and relentless, but for Henry, the memories of his former life were even colder. How did it all come to this? Henry wondered. Not long ago, he was Elliot Graves, one of the most powerful names on Wall Street. Henry's mind drifted back to a morning from that other life, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his luxurious penthouse, where every detail had been curated with meticulous precision. He had stepped out in a tailored black suit, heading to the limousine waiting below. His young and sharp personal assistant, Michael, followed close behind, clutching a thick leather briefcase. "Mr. Graves, the board meeting has been moved to 10 a.m. after that. You have lunch with the Japanese investors, and tonight is your charity gala at the Waldorf Astoria." Elliot Graves gave a slight nod, his eyes glued to his phone screen as market indices scrolled by like an orchestrated symphony. When he entered the boardroom, every gaze turned to him, a mixture of deference and tension. Elliot sat down, unbuttoned his jacket, and spoke with calm authority. "Let's begin. I don't want my time wasted." In that room, he was a king. His decisions brought massive profits to the company, but at what cost? Henry's thoughts lingered on a particular meeting, a turning point that altered thousands of lives. Michael stood beside him, reading from a report. "Sir, the land reclamation in Brooklyn will affect nearly 300 families. Some have started organizing protests. If we proceed, there may be public backlash." Elliot frowned, his voice icy. "Public backlash is not our concern. Hire a PR team to handle it. As for those families, follow legal procedures. We don't have time for negotiations." Michael hesitated. "But sir, many of these families have lived there for 3 generations. They have nowhere else to go." Elliot placed his hands on the table, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "Michael, I pay you to find solutions, not to lecture me on morality." No one dared object. Elliot's decision displaced hundreds, leaving them with nowhere to turn, and on the nights that followed, he didn't lose a moment's sleep over it. Everything changed in just a few short years. A sudden financial crisis sent Henry's net worth plummeting. Trusted partners turned their backs, and shareholders who once worshipped him became his most unforgiving enemies. Henry remembered standing in his penthouse, looking out over the city below. The phone rang incessantly, calls from banks, lawyers, and people he once considered friends. A lawyer's voice echoed in his memory. "Mr. Graves, your companies are on the brink of bankruptcy. We recommend immediate liquidation of assets." Henry had stood there, silent, feeling as though the world was collapsing beneath him. Soon after, he lost everything. The mansion, the cars, the company, all sold to cover his debts. Even those closest to him abandoned him, and then, he became a forgotten name. Henry opened his eyes, his hands trembling as he held the sandwich from the paper bag. It had grown cold in the winter air, but the warmth of Emma's gesture lingered. He took a small bite. The simple taste of the sandwich brought tears to his eyes. "There was a time I wouldn't have even noticed something this small," he thought. Henry gazed out at the street, where the lights of towering buildings still burned brightly. He had once stood at the top of that world, but now, he was just another lost soul in the shadows. "Maybe this is the price I have to pay." But then Emma's face appeared in his mind. Her kindness sparked an unexpected thought within him. "Could I start again?" Henry whispered to himself. "One more time. Just one more time." The wind continued to cut through the night, but within Henry, a faint light began to flicker. Pulling his coat tighter around him, Henry looked up at the dark sky above the bridge. Though the stars were obscured by the city's glow, he felt as though he had found a small reason to carry on. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the towering buildings, casting a muted glow onto the damp streets. Henry stirred beneath the Manhattan Bridge, the heavy weight of the cold night still pressing on his weary shoulders. Emma's sandwich, though long cold, was the only breakfast he had. He picked it up, took a small bite, and gazed distantly at the stream of cars passing by. Suddenly, a shadow loomed before him. A middle-aged man, rugged and weathered, stood there with a cigarette smoldering between his lips. The man removed the cigarette, exhaling smoke into the chilly air, before speaking. "Hey there, buddy. I've seen you sitting here the past few days. New around here?" Henry looked up, his tired eyes meeting the man's. He didn't respond immediately, just nodded faintly. The man set his backpack down and plopped onto the ground beside Henry without waiting for an invitation. He had a seasoned look about him, with graying hair and a worn military jacket. "Name's Tom," the man said, extending a hand. "What about you?" Henry hesitated, then reached out to shake it. "Henry," Tom nodded, taking another drag from his cigarette before continuing. "Henry, let me guess. You don't look like the usual crowd around here. Your hands are still clean, and your eyes look like someone who's had money. A lot of it." Henry frowned, surprised by Tom's sharp observation. "How do you know that?" Tom smirked, a knowing glint in his eye. "Buddy, you spend enough time out here, you meet all kinds. Some folks are homeless because they've been poor all their lives. Then there are the ones who had it all and lost it. You're the second kind." Henry stayed silent, neither confirming nor denying. Tom studied him for a moment, his gaze tinged with curiosity. "So, what happened to you?" Henry shook his head, his voice low and raspy. "It's a long story. But to put it simply, I lost everything." Tom nodded without pressing further. He pulled out another cigarette but put it away instead of lighting it. "Out here, no one cares who you used to be. All that matters is surviving another day. Have you gotten used to that yet?" Henry let out a faint, bitter laugh. "Still working on it." After a moment of silence, Tom began to share his own story. He was a former soldier, having served in the military for 15 years. But after leaving the service, life became an uphill battle. I got hit with PTSD, Tom said, his voice steady but distant. Lost my job, then my home, and eventually my family. My wife couldn't handle living with a guy who'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night like some kind of lunatic. So, she left, took the kids with her. Henry listened quietly, saying nothing. Tom exhaled a cloud of smoke, his gaze distant. At first I tried to start over. But nobody wants to hire a broken-down vet with a head full of war memories. I drifted from place to place, and eventually, I ended up here under this bridge. Tom turned to Henry, shrugging. That's my story. What's yours? Henry lowered his head, his eyes heavy with regret. I used to have everything: money, power, fame. But I lost it all because of my own greed and stupidity. Tom gave a faint, knowing smirk and nodded. Sounds familiar. Out here, everyone's got a story. Standing up, Tom brushed the dust off his worn-out pants. Listen, Henry, living out here alone isn't easy. If you need anything, come find me. I'm over on the other side of the bridge. Henry watched Tom walk away, a strange feeling stirring within him. He wasn't sure if he could trust the man, but he couldn't deny that Tom's presence had brought a faint sense of comfort. Left alone again beneath the bridge, Henry sat quietly as the pale sunlight washed over his face. Tom's story echoed in his mind, sparking a thought. Everyone has a past, but not everyone gives up hope. Henry realized he might need to learn how to live in the present, instead of drowning in his past. For the first time in a long while, he considered that perhaps there was still something worth fighting for. The following evening, the faint golden sunlight faded from New York streets, replaced by the bright glow of streetlights. Henry remained in his usual spot beneath the Manhattan Bridge, accustomed to quietly watching the flow of hurried footsteps and indifferent glances. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out. Emma, with her vibrant red scarf, appeared from a distance. She carried her usual small paper bag, but there was something different about her tonight. Emma knelt in front of Henry and placed the bag before him, her warm smile lighting up the chilly evening. I brought you a gift today. It's not just a sandwich, she said. Henry looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his tired eyes, though his expression stayed guarded. You again. Aren't you afraid I'll become a burden to you? Emma laughed lightly, her voice gentle. I'm not afraid of that. You need this more than I do. Henry opened the paper bag to find a pair of brand new gray wool gloves. He stared at the gift, his eyes betraying a glimmer of emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. Why are you doing this? Henry asked, his voice hoarse tinged with confusion. Emma sat down beside him, her gaze sincere and steady. Because you need it. Yesterday, I noticed your hands were freezing, and it's only going to get colder. These gloves will keep you warm. Henry looked down at the gloves in his rough, calloused hands, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the soft wool. Memories of a time when such small items went unnoticed by him flooded back. He remained silent for a long moment before speaking slowly. You don't know who I am or what I've done. Why would you care about someone like me? Emma turned to him, her eyes shining in the glow of the streetlights. I don't need to know who you were. What matters is that you're a person, and I believe everyone deserves kindness. Henry closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Her answer brought back memories of his own indifference to those in need, pleading eyes he had ignored without a second thought. I don't deserve this, Henry muttered bitterly. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder, her smile soft and reassuring. No one is undeserving. Sometimes, all it takes is a little help to change an entire life. Henry looked at Emma, feeling a warmth in her words that he hadn't felt in ages. Slowly, he slipped on the gloves, his movements deliberate, as if savoring the simple act. Thank you, Henry said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. Emma stood up, brushing the dust from her skirt. Her tone carried quiet determination as she said, I'll come back tomorrow. If there's anything you need, just let me know. Henry watched her walk away, her red scarf fluttering in the breeze. For the first time in months, he felt that he wasn't entirely alone in the world. Clutching the gloves tightly, Henry could feel the warmth of the small yet meaningful gift. Within him, a faint glimmer of hope emerged, like a tiny flame struggling to stay alight in the midst of winter's cold. Maybe I still have a chance to start over, he thought. The next morning, New York's sky was overcast, hinting at an impending rainstorm. Henry sat in his usual spot beneath the Manhattan Bridge, cradling the plastic cup in his hands. The gray wool gloves Emma had given him kept his hands warm against the biting cold. The streets gradually grew busier as commuters hurried to work. But today, there was a subtle tension in the air. A group of young men stood not far from Henry, laughing loudly and occasionally glancing his way with a sneer. Henry didn't pay them much attention until one of them, a red-haired man in a bright hoodie, strolled over. His eyes gleamed with mockery as he addressed Henry. "Hey, old man, what are you doing here? How much have you made with that little cup of yours?" Henry looked up, his gaze calm but unflinching. "I'm just sitting here. I'm not bothering you." The red-haired man chuckled and turned back to his friends, laughing as if Henry's reply was the punchline to a joke. "Did you hear that? The old guy says he's not bothering us." Another one of the group stepped forward, grabbing Henry's plastic cup and shaking it so the few coins inside clattered onto the ground. "Is this all you've got after sitting here all day? Let us help you clean up." Henry tried to stand, his legs trembling from the cold and hunger. He looked at the group, his voice low but firm. "Take it if you want, just leave me alone." His words only fueled their laughter. One of them kicked the cup, sending it flying, the coins scattering across the pavement. "Begging now, old man? Nobody cares about you," the red-haired man taunted. As the situation grew more tense, a strong voice rang out from behind them. "Stop it right now." Emma appeared, her red scarf fluttering as she strode toward them with determined steps. Her eyes blazed with anger as she confronted the group, unafraid despite their numbers. "You think it's fun to bully a homeless man? That's pathetic." The red-haired man turned, raising an eyebrow as he smirked. Well, look who it is. Are you the old man's friend? Trying to be a hero?" Emma stood her ground, stepping in front of Henry as a shield. "If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police. Let's see who has fun then." The group hesitated, some of them murmuring nervously. "Damn it, let's not get into trouble," one muttered. But the red-haired man wasn't ready to back down. "The cops? You think that'll scare me?" Emma didn't flinch. She pulled out her phone and started dialing right in front of them. Her resolute action made the group falter. The red-haired man sneered one last time, pointing at Henry. "Lucky day, old man. Don't expect it next time." The group scattered, leaving behind a mess of spilled coins and lingering tension. Emma turned to Henry, helping him sit back down. Her eyes were filled with concern. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Henry shook his head, his voice a mix of weariness and resignation. "You didn't have to do that. I'm used to it. No one ever stands up for people like me." Emma frowned, her tone firm. "You don't deserve to be treated like that. No one does. You have to stand up for yourself and not let them walk all over you." Henry looked at her, surprised by her conviction. This young woman, so small yet so brave, had done something he hadn't dared. She had stood up to injustice. "Thank you," Henry said, his voice soft and sincere. "You're remarkable." Emma smiled faintly, though worry lingered in her eyes. "You need to be more careful. I'll help you find somewhere safer to stay." Henry shook his head, his tone conflicted. "I don't want to trouble you. I'm just an old man with nothing left to lose." Emma placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her gaze unwavering. "Don't say that. You still have value, and you still have a chance to start over. You just need to believe it." She bent down, gathering the scattered coins and placing them back into the cup before handing it to Henry. As she prepared to leave, she looked at him with determination. "I'll come back. You're not alone, Henry." Henry watched her walk away, her red scarf disappearing into the crowd. Her words echoed in his mind, a small light piercing the darkness of his thoughts. "You're not alone." Clutching the cup in his hands, Henry felt, for the first time in a long while, that perhaps the world hadn't entirely abandoned him. Late in the afternoon, Henry sat under the Manhattan Bridge, his usual refuge. The pale golden sunlight filtered through the gaps in the bridge, casting dappled patterns on the ground. In the quiet stillness, the distant hum of car horns blended with the whistling wind. From the far side of the bridge, Tom approached, his familiar backpack slung over his shoulder. A nearly spent cigarette hung from his lips. Henry noticed him, but said nothing, still lost in thought about his encounter with Emma that morning. Tom dropped down next to Henry without a word, as if it were the most natural thing to do. He lit a fresh cigarette, exhaled a plume of smoke, and glanced sideways at Henry. "Word is, you had some fun this morning. I heard a group of punks gave you trouble." Henry furrowed his brow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Where'd you hear that?" Tom smirked, his tone tinged with irony. "News travels fast around here, faster than you'd think. Those kids like to flex their so-called power by picking on people who can't fight back." Henry nodded, his expression weary. "They kicked over my cup, but Emma showed up. She stood up for me. I've never met anyone like her." Tom blew a stream of smoke into the air, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Emma, the young woman with the red scarf. Yeah, I've seen her around. She's different. She actually cares, which is rare. But listen, Henry, don't get too reliant on her." Henry frowned, his voice tinged with irritation. "I'm not relying on her. I don't even want her to bother with me." Tom let out a raspy laugh. "Come on, Henry, don't kid yourself. If she hadn't shown up this morning, those punks would have made your day a whole lot worse. You know what I think? Emma sees something in you, something worth helping." Henry fell silent, his gaze distant. Tom took another drag on his cigarette, then ground the butt under his boot. "Look, Henry, I've been out here long enough to know one thing. If you want to survive, you've got to get up on your own 2 feet. No one's going to save you forever, not even someone as kind as Emma." Henry turned to him, his eyes a mix of curiosity and confusion. "What are you trying to say?" Leaning back against the wall, Tom's gaze grew unfocused, lost in old memories. "Back in the day, someone helped me too. A girl like Emma, kind, patient. She brought me food, talked to me, even found me a shelter. But you know what? She couldn't change me, because I didn't want to change." Tom fixed his eyes on Henry, his tone suddenly serious. "You need to ask yourself, Henry, do you want to keep living like this forever? Or do you want to do something to change it?" Tom's words felt like a jolt, shaking Henry from his mental fog. He looked down at his hands, the gray wool gloves Emma had given him still warm against his skin. "I've lost everything," Henry murmured. "I don't even know if I can start over." Tom let out a deep, throaty laugh that echoed under the bridge. "Buddy, let me tell you something. We've all lost everything. But life's about moving forward, no matter how tough it gets." Henry looked up, his eyes heavy with thought. Tom's words, rough as they were, rang with a raw truth. There was a hard-earned wisdom in the man that Henry couldn't ignore. Tom reached into his backpack and pulled out a small bottle of liquor. He offered it to Henry, but Henry shook his head. "No, thanks. I quit drinking a long time ago." Tom shrugged and took a small sip himself before tucking the bottle away. He clapped Henry on the shoulder, his tone softer now. "Listen, Henry. I'm not saying you need to turn your life around in a day or even a week. But if you want to start, find one small reason to keep going. That's all it takes." Henry sat quietly, his gaze drifting to the gray sky above the bridge. Tom's words stirred something deep within him, a faint spark of hope, fragile but present. Tom stood, brushing off his worn pants. "Come on, Henry, I know you're not the kind of guy to give up that easily. If you need anything, you know where to find me." Henry watched as Tom walked away, his figure fading into the distance. A storm of emotions churned inside him. He knew he couldn't keep hiding in the past, but the thought of starting over filled him with doubt. One small reason. Henry repeated Tom's words to himself, as though searching for something to hold on to. The wind whistled through the bridge, carrying a biting chill. Yet in Henry's heart, a faint light began to flicker, fragile ember refusing to be extinguished. Late at night, Henry sat alone beneath the Manhattan Bridge. The New York sky was pitch black, and the faint yellow glow of streetlights cast dim streaks across the ground. The distant hum of traffic carried on, oblivious to the man who had long separated himself from that world. In his hands was an old fountain pen, the only remnant of his once luxurious life. Henry turned it over and over, his gaze thoughtful and distant. Sitting up straight, he uncapped the pen, and began writing on a crumpled scrap of paper he'd found in a nearby trash bin. The first words appeared, hesitant but legible. "Things to do." Henry stared at the words for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly. For a brief instant he felt as if he were confronting his truest self, not Elliot Graves of the past, but Henry, the man searching for a reason to move forward. He wrote further: 1. Thank Emma. 2. Find a way to help those around me. 3. Look for a job, no matter how small. Henry gazed at the simple yet meaningful list, a mix of fear and hope swelling within him. Folding the paper carefully, he tucked it into his coat pocket and looked out into the distance. He knew that to follow through on this plan, He would have to start with the person who had shown him kindness. Emma. Henry returned to the street corner where Emma often appeared. Despite being accustomed to the cold streets, he felt a nervous energy as he waited. Around midday, Emma arrived, her red scarf fluttering as she carried a large paper bag. Her smile was bright as she spotted Henry. "Good morning, Mr. Henry. It's not too cold today. How are you feeling?" Henry nodded, warmed by her smile. "Thank you. I've been thinking about everything you've done for me." Emma tilted her head, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "You don't have to thank me. I've only done little things." Henry shook his head, his voice steady and sincere. "No, Emma, what you've done isn't small. It's changed how I see everything." Emma's smile softened, but she noticed the serious look in Henry's eyes. She sat beside him, ready to listen. Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper he'd written the night before. His hands trembled slightly as he handed it to her. "I wrote this. It's a small plan, but I want to do something to start over." Emma unfolded the paper and read the lines carefully. Her eyes lit up as she reached the second point. "Find a way to help those around me. Mr. Henry, this is a wonderful plan, and I believe you can do it." Henry let out a faint laugh, though his eyes glimmered with determination. "I'm not sure I have the strength, but if someone believes in me, maybe I should try." Emma nodded firmly, her eyes filled with resolve. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll help you." Henry looked at her, gratitude welling up inside him. "Thank you, Emma. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Emma shook her head with a gentle smile. "You don't have to repay me. Just try your best for yourself, that's all that matters." The two spent the morning discussing ways to bring the plan to life. Emma suggested they start by helping other homeless people in the area. "I know a few places where we can ask for leftover food. We could distribute it to those who need it. What do you think?" Henry pondered for a moment before nodding. "That's a good idea. If I can do something to help others, that's where I should begin." Standing up, Henry felt a strength he hadn't felt in weeks. He and Emma walked toward the bustling streets, where a small but meaningful plan was beginning to take shape. Under the morning light, Henry held the old fountain pen tightly in his hand. To him, it was no longer just a pen, it was a symbol of a new beginning, a journey toward reclaiming his life, one small step at a time. Start with the smallest things, and never give up. A busy afternoon in Brooklyn, where narrow alleys intertwined like a maze. Henry and Emma moved from store to store with a large paper bag in hand, asking for leftover food. The air carried the aroma of fresh bread, mingling with the honks of cars and hurried footsteps of passersby. For Henry, this journey was both a test of his pride and a lesson in patience. Emma stopped in front of a small bakery at a street corner. A middle-aged woman was packing old bread into a box. Emma turned to Henry and whispered, "Let me talk to her. Maybe we'll get lucky." Stepping forward with a bright smile, Emma greeted the woman. "Hello, I'm Emma. We're collecting leftover food to distribute to homeless people. Could you help us?" The woman looked up, her gaze wary. She glanced at Emma, then at Henry, who stood a few steps back with his shoulders slightly hunched from tension. "You want this bread?" the shopkeeper asked, gesturing to the box. "It's old, nearly expired." "I'm not sure I should be giving it to you." Emma nodded, her tone sincere. "We don't need fresh bread. These loaves could mean a lot to those who are hungry." The woman paused, then sighed. Handing the box to Emma, her expression softened. "Fine, but make sure to keep it clean and give it to those who really need it." Emma beamed with gratitude and turned back to Henry. "We've got something. There are a few more places. Would you like to try?" Henry nodded, feeling a small weight lifted off his chest at seeing Emma's enthusiasm. They continued their rounds, but not every stop was as welcoming. At a large fast food restaurant, the young manager frowned as Emma explained their mission. "Leftover food. Sorry, we can't do that. Company policy prohibits giving away unused items." Emma pressed on. "We're only asking for items you're planning to throw away. We'll take full responsibility." But the manager shook his head firmly. "No, if you want to help, you can buy the food at a discounted price. We can't just give it away." From behind, Henry saw the flicker of disappointment in Emma's eyes. He stepped closer and said softly, "It's all right, let's move on. Not everyone is willing to help." Emma squeezed his hand gently, offering a reassuring smile. "We'll find another place. Don't lose heart." Their next stop was a smaller bakery, where an older man was wiping down the counter. Once again, Emma stepped forward to explain their cause. The man listened intently, his gaze moving between Emma and Henry, who stood silently in the background. "You're doing this to help the homeless?" the shopkeeper asked. Emma nodded, her voice filled with determination. "Yes. This is the first step in our plan. We want to do something to help those struggling around us." The man stroked his chin thoughtfully, then disappeared into the back of the shop. When he returned, he carried a large bag of bread, placing it in Emma's hands. "I don't have much, but I hope this helps someone." Emma bowed her head in gratitude, while Henry remained silent, his eyes glistening. As they left the bakery, Henry turned to Emma, his voice trembling slightly. "Thank you, Emma. I don't think I could have done this on my own." Emma smiled warmly, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. "You don't have to do it alone, Henry. I told you we're in this together. But do you see now? There are people willing to help. We just have to ask." Henry nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. Emma's words were like a guiding light, helping him push past the fear and helplessness that had weighed on him for so long. As dusk settled, Henry and Emma returned to the bridge with a bag full of food. The nearby homeless gathered around, their eyes lighting up with hope at the sight of the bread. Henry handed out the loaves slowly, for the first time feeling the warmth of doing something for others. In the fading light of the evening, Henry allowed himself a small smile. He thought to himself, "Sometimes, starting over isn't as hard as I thought it would be." Dusk had fallen, and under the Manhattan Bridge, the atmosphere was unusually lively. Henry and Emma had just begun distributing bread and leftovers they had collected. Small groups of homeless individuals gathered, their eager eyes and rare smiles lighting up the simple setting. Words of gratitude echoed in the cool evening air. Amid the activity, a familiar figure appeared, the red-haired troublemaker, who had caused problems for Henry days earlier. He stood at a distance, watching coldly as the scene unfolded. Henry handed a bag of bread to a middle-aged woman, whose hands trembled as she accepted it. Suddenly, a mocking voice rang out behind him. "How hilarious. A homeless old man playing charity worker. Who do you think you are? Some kind of savior?" Henry turned around, his calm eyes meeting the sneering gaze of the red-haired man. His hands clenched slightly, but his posture remained composed. Emma, standing beside him, tensed, her expression sharp with alertness. "I'm just doing what I can," Henry replied evenly. "That has nothing to do with you." The red-haired man smirked, stepping closer. Behind him, a few of his friends from the earlier incident lingered, snickering. "Oh, but it does," he said. "This is our turf. You think you can waltz in here, handing out goodies, without asking for permission?" Emma stepped forward, placing herself between Henry and the man. Her voice was firm and unwavering. "This isn't anyone's turf. It's a place for people who need help, and that's what we're here to do." The red-haired man laughed loudly, but his grin was full of mockery. "Listen, little girl, you don't get it. Around here, there are rules, and if you want to keep this up, you've got to pay up. Got it?" Emma didn't flinch, but Henry gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice calm. "Emma, let me handle this." Stepping forward, Henry faced the red-haired man directly, his eyes steady and resolute. "We're not here to cause trouble or take anything from you. We're here to help the people who need it." The man raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "Help? You think these people need your bread? They need money, and I can guarantee you that money would be put to better use than this garbage." Henry didn't respond immediately. He glanced around at the homeless individuals watching the confrontation in uneasy silence. Their eyes reflected not just fear, but a deeper resignation. The red-haired man wasn't just a threat, he was a symbol of the oppression they couldn't escape. Taking a deep breath, Henry replied, "I don't have money to give you, but I can tell you this. What you're doing doesn't make you stronger, it makes you weaker." The red-haired man's expression hardened, his voice dropping. "What did you just say?" Henry held his ground, his voice steady but firm. "A strong person doesn't need to bully others to prove themselves. If you really want to be strong, try helping others instead of pushing them down." For a brief moment, the red-haired man hesitated, his face betraying a flicker of uncertainty, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by his usual swagger. "Fine," he said, his tone dismissive. "Do your thing, old man. But don't think I'll forget this, I'll be back." He turned and walked away, his friends following reluctantly. The tension under the bridge slowly dissipated, but the lingering fear in the eyes of the homeless remained. Emma turned to Henry, her expression a mix of concern and pride. "That was brave of you, Henry, but I'm worried they'll come back to cause more trouble." Henry gave a faint smile, his voice calm in a way that surprised even himself. "They might, but I'm not afraid. If I don't stand up for what's right now, I'll always be the coward I was before." Emma's smile returned, admiration shining in her eyes. "Shall we continue, then?" Henry nodded, and together they resumed distributing the food. This time, the silence of the homeless broke into quiet but heartfelt words of thanks, underscored as the distribution came to an end. Henry sat down, watching the homeless people share their food and engage in cheerful conversations. A warmth filled his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. "This is how I rebuild my life," he thought, his gaze lifting to the star-filled sky above. Emma sat beside him, her voice soft but resolute. "Mr. Henry, I believe we're doing something truly good here, and no one can stop that." Henry smiled, and for the first time, he felt that life was no longer just about pain and loss, it could also be about hope and purpose. A quiet evening under the Manhattan Bridge. The air was as cold as ever, but the atmosphere felt different. Henry sat among the homeless group he and Emma had just finished feeding. The faint glow of a nearby street lamp barely illuminated their gaunt faces, which now held faint glimmers of hope. Emma had gone home, leaving Henry behind with the group people he was beginning to feel an unexpected connection with. He held an empty paper cup in his hands, looking around at the others. They sat in a small circle, sharing the last scraps of bread. Tom leaned back, a cigarette dangling from his fingers as he gazed absently at the night sky. "Henry," Tom began, his voice low and thoughtful, "you know what I hate most? Feeling invisible, like we don't exist to anyone else." Henry nodded, his expression somber. "I know, I used to be one of those people. I didn't see any of you." Tom smirked, the corner of his mouth curling into a bitter smile. "At least you admit it. Me, I've never believed people could change. But you might be proving me wrong." Henry turned to Mary, a middle-aged woman with stringy graying hair and a threadbare coat. She sat quietly, staring at the piece of bread in her hands. "What about you, Mary?" Henry asked gently. "How long have you been here?" Mary looked up, her voice hoarse but tinged with a heavy sadness. 3 years. My husband died of cancer. I couldn't keep up with the rent. I tried. But in the end, I ended up here." She paused, her eyes welling up. "My daughter. She's still little. I gave her to a friend to take care of. I couldn't let her live like this." Her voice broke as she added, "I haven't seen her since. I can't let her see me like this." Henry didn't say anything, but the weight of Mary's pain hung heavy in the air. A younger man, Jack, broke the silence with a cynical laugh. "Me, I don't have some tragic story. I'm here because I'm stupid. I got caught up in gambling, sank myself in debt, and now, nothing." Jack looked at Henry, his tone edged with defiance. "But I'm not like you. I don't think I can start over. Do you think you can?" Jack's question hung in the cold air. The circle fell silent, their eyes fixed on Henry, filled with quiet curiosity. They didn't expect a perfect answer, just something honest. Henry took a moment before replying. "I don't know," he said softly. "But I have to try. Not because I think I'll succeed, but because I don't want to die full of regrets." Tom raised an eyebrow, taking a drag from his cigarette, before exhaling a thin plume of smoke. "Fair enough. But where are you going to start?" Henry smiled faintly, reaching into his pocket for the old fountain pen. "I've written out a small plan. I don't know where it'll lead, but for now, I want to help people like us before I think of anything bigger." The group fell silent again, this time with an air of respect. They looked at Henry with a mix of surprise and tentative trust. Mary placed her hands on her knees and spoke softly. "If you need me to help, I will. I don't have much to give, but I can help hand out food." Jack chuckled, though his voice lacked its usual sharpness. "I'll help too, but don't expect much from me. I'm doing this because I've got nothing else to lose." Tom let out a hearty laugh, clapping Henry on the shoulder. "See, you're not alone, Henry. We're a messed up little family, but at least we stick together." Henry looked around at the faces in the circle. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging, fragile but real. As the night deepened, the group began to drift into sleep, their conversations fading into the stillness. Henry sat quietly, their stories echoing in his mind. Each of them carried a unique pain, but they all shared the same fragile hope, a chance at a kinder life. Henry picked up his fountain pen, adding a new line to his crumpled piece of paper. Next step, create change, no matter how small. The dim streetlight cast a soft glow over his face as he folded the paper and tucked it away. For the first time in a long while, Henry felt that he was moving in the right direction. A cold Sunday morning, yet under the Manhattan Bridge, the atmosphere was unusually bustling. Henry, Emma, and a group of homeless volunteers were busy preparing for their first large-scale food distribution event. Along with the usual bread, they had managed to include hot soup and drinks, thanks to contributions from the small stores Emma had reached out to. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, but Henry felt an unfamiliar warmth as he watched everyone work together. Emma, her hands deftly organizing meal portions, turned to Henry with a bright smile. "See this, Henry, everyone's ready. I think today will be a success." Henry nodded, his gaze sweeping over the group. Tom was busy mixing drinks, Jack was checking food bags, and Mary stood at the entrance, gently guiding the line of people to queue in an orderly fashion. "I never thought we could pull off something like this," Henry admitted. "But it's all because of you, Emma." Emma shook her head, her voice firm. "No, Henry, this happened because you had the courage to start. If it weren't for you, none of these people would believe they could make a difference." As the distribution began, more people arrived than Henry had expected. Gaunt faces and frostbitten hands reached out for the small but meaningful meals. An older man with a scruffy beard took his portion and murmured, "Thank you. It's been so long since I've had a hot meal like this." Mary smiled warmly as she replied, "It's nothing. We're here to help." Nearby, a young mother cradling her infant accepted a bag from Jack, her eyes red with gratitude. "Thank you. You're all so kind." Jack, usually sardonic and distant, only nodded, his eyes betraying a hint of discomfort. Standing nearby, Henry noticed the subtle change in Jack's demeanor, small but meaningful shift. Amid the flurry of activity, a well-dressed woman with a large camera approached. She was a journalist from a local paper, drawn to the unusual scene under the bridge. "Excuse me," she said, scanning the group. "Who's organizing this event?" Emma glanced at Henry, silently encouraging him to step forward. After a brief hesitation, Henry approached the journalist. "We're doing this together. There's no leader here," he said. The journalist smiled, intrigued. "Can I ask you a few questions? This is wonderful work you're doing. How did it all start?" Henry took a deep breath, steadying himself before recounting the story. The sandwich Emma had brought him, his small plan scribbled on a scrap of paper, and the collective effort of everyone involved. The journalist listened intently, taking notes. Finally, she asked, "What do you think is the most important thing when it comes to helping the homeless?" Henry glanced around at the people working and those they were helping. After a moment, he replied, "Respect. No one wants to be pitied, and no one wants to be forgotten. They need opportunities to rebuild their lives and to be treated like human beings." The journalist paused, seemingly moved by his answer. She smiled warmly. "I'll write about this event. I hope it brings more attention and support to your work." As the event wound down, everyone pitched in to clean up. Henry felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He turned to Emma, his voice thoughtful. "I'm not sure having a journalist here was a good idea. It might bring trouble." Emma placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with encouragement. "Don't worry, Henry. If this story gets out, it could help more people learn about what we're doing, and who knows, maybe it'll bring others who want to help." Henry nodded, but unease lingered in his heart. He knew that outside attention could bring opportunities, but it might also invite new challenges. At night, Henry sat alone under the bridge, staring at the gray clouds overhead. A question gnawed at him. Do I have the strength to keep going? But then he thought of the people who had received food, their smiles and heartfelt thanks. The memory filled him with a sense of purpose he couldn't ignore. Gripping his fountain pen tightly, Henry whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." A few days after the food distribution, an article from the local journalist made the front page of a small newspaper. The bold headline read, "Hope Beneath the Manhattan Bridge, a homeless man transforming his community." The article detailed the efforts led by Henry and the group, highlighting their determination, resilience, and the powerful message of compassion. It quickly gained traction, spreading across social media and attracting attention from charitable organizations and even some entrepreneurs. However, the spotlight brought not only support but also unexpected challenges. One morning, Emma ran excitedly to the bridge, clutching a copy of the newspaper in her hands. She could barely contain her enthusiasm as she waved it in front of Henry. "Mr. Henry, look at this. The article about us is everywhere. I even saw people sharing it online." Henry took the newspaper, his eyes scanning the lines. A faint smile crept onto his face, but beneath it lay a flicker of unease. "That's impressive. But I'm not sure we're ready for this kind of attention," he murmured. Emma tilted her head, puzzled. "Why not? If more people know what we're doing, we'll get more help. This could be a huge opportunity." Henry sighed, his gaze drifting. "You're right, Emma. But attention comes with responsibility. We can't just stay a small, casual group anymore. There will be people who disagree with us, and maybe even try to stop us." That afternoon, a sleek car pulled up near the bridge. A middle-aged man in a sharp suit stepped out, exuding confidence. Introducing himself as Robert Kane, a local charity benefactor, he approached Henry with an outstretched hand. "I read about your work," Robert said warmly. "What you're doing is truly remarkable. I'd like to contribute to help you expand this project." Henry furrowed his brow, studying the man. "We're not an organization, Mr. Kane. We're just a small group trying to help those around us." Robert smiled, his voice smooth and persuasive. "Then let me help you become an organization. With my financial support, you can scale up, reach more people, and make an even bigger impact." Emma's eyes lit up. "That sounds amazing. We could do so much more." But Henry remained cautious. He knew all too well that grant offers often came with strings attached. "Thank you for the offer, but we need time to consider it," he replied. Robert nodded, handing Henry a business card. "I hope to hear from you soon. I truly believe we can accomplish something great together." After Robert left, Tom, who had been lounging nearby, sat up and flicked his cigarette. "Henry, are you crazy? The guy's offering money, and you're hesitating. We need money to keep this going, don't we?" Mary chimed in, her voice thoughtful. "I understand Henry's concern. If we take their money, will we still have control over what we're doing?" Jack, as usual, folded his arms with a smirk. "Oh, perfect. Let's just reject the money and keep struggling. Brilliant plan." Emma turned to Henry, her tone gentle but firm. "I think we should give it a chance. This is an opportunity to help so many more people. Henry, we can't let fear hold us back." Henry exhaled deeply, looking around at the group. This small argument made him realize that even within their close-knit circle, there were differing opinions. That night, after everyone had left, Henry sat alone under the bridge, turning Robert's business card over in his hand. Conflict churned in his mind. Can I trust him? If we take the money, what will we lose? But if we don't, am I throwing away a chance to help more people? He looked up at the starry sky, the pinpricks of light stark against the dark expanse. This decision wouldn't just affect him, it would impact everyone they were trying to help. Finally, he slipped the card into his pocket, muttering to himself, "I need more time. Not every opportunity is worth taking." The next morning, Henry gathered the group to discuss Robert's offer. But before they could come to a decision, something unexpected happened. The red-haired troublemaker and his gang returned, this time with reinforcements. They weren't just standing around this time, they were ready to cause real trouble. The next challenge has begun, Henry thought, his gaze steady and resolute. The usually peaceful atmosphere under the Manhattan Bridge turned tense. Henry and his group were preparing for another food distribution. Loaves of bread, hot soup, and drinks were neatly arranged, ready to be shared. From a distance, a group of young men approached, their faces radiating defiance. At the lead was Red, but this time, he wasn't alone. 7 or 8 others followed him, their hostile gazes fixed on Henry and his team. Henry looked up, locking eyes with Red. His heart quickened, but he quickly steadied himself. Beside him, Emma whispered, "They're back, and this time it looks worse." Tom, busy mixing drinks, glanced over at the approaching group and took a drag from his cigarette. "Looks like trouble. Henry, what's your plan?" Henry stepped forward, positioning himself in front of the group. Red smirked, his eyes glinting with arrogance. "I warned you, didn't I?" Red said, "If you want to do this here, you need my permission." Henry's voice remained calm. "You don't own this place, and we're not here to harm you. We're here to help those who need it." Red laughed loudly, turning to his crew. "Did you hear that? The old man thinks he's a saint. Let me make it clear, Henry. Just by being here, you're bothering me." Henry stayed silent, his steady gaze frustrating Red. One of Red's followers stepped forward and kicked over a container of water the group had prepared. The water spilled across the ground, soaking several bags of bread. Emma gasped. "What are you doing? That's food for people in need." Red crossed his arms, his smirk growing colder. "I'm just reminding you that this isn't the place to play charity." Tom stepped closer, narrowing his eyes at Red. "Listen, kid, if you want to pick a fight, pick it with me. But leave the food and these people alone." Red sneered, his tone mocking. "Oh, you want to fight, old man? I'm not scared." The tension grew thick. The homeless individuals nearby retreated, their faces filled with fear as they anticipated violence. Before the situation could spiral out of control, Henry raised his hand, signaling for calm. He stepped closer to Red, his eyes steady, now filled with both resolve and compassion. "Listen to me," Henry said firmly. "You're wasting your time. We're not here to compete with you, and we're not leaving. But if you want to stop us, do something worthwhile instead. Instead of tearing us down, why not help?" Red blinked, caught off guard by Henry's words. His followers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to react. "Help," Red scoffed, though his bravado faltered for a moment. "You think I'm that kind of guy?" Henry shrugged, his voice calm but resolute. "Anyone can change. Even you." For a fleeting moment, Red's face betrayed doubt, but he quickly turned away, regaining his composure. "Let's go," he barked to his group. "Let's see how long they last." The group left, their laughter echoing in the distance, leaving behind a quiet but tense atmosphere. Emma exhaled deeply, turning to Henry. "You stayed so calm. I thought they were going to do something worse." Henry chuckled softly, though his eyes were filled with concern. "I'm not sure I handled it the best way, but I didn't want this to turn into a fight." Tom walked over, a scowl on his face. "Sometimes, Henry, fighting is the only way to survive. But I'll admit you handled that better than I thought you would." The homeless volunteers began cleaning up the mess. Jack picked up the soggy bags of bread, grimacing. "This is why I said we need more support. Without real resources, we're just sitting ducks." Jack's words hung in the air, and everyone fell silent. Henry knew Jack was right. Even though they had avoided violence today, the group faced challenges far greater than a spilled container of water. As the cleanup finished, Henry sat down, exhaustion etched on his face. He stared at the remaining bags of bread, torn between hope and worry. Emma sat beside him, her tone soft but determined. "You can't do this alone, Henry. We need to find a way to grow, or people like Red will keep causing problems." Henry nodded slowly, his thoughts heavy. "You're right. Maybe it's time I make a decision about Robert Kane's offer." The setting sun bathed the bridge in a warm orange glow. Henry knew the choice ahead wasn't just about their small group, it could shape his path, and the lives of countless others. Night had fallen onto the Manhattan Bridge. The weak glow of the streetlights illuminated the weary but determined faces of Henry's group. They gathered around a small fire, the warmth of the crackling wood offering a fleeting reprieve from the cold. Henry held Robert Kane's business card in his hand, turning it over repeatedly. He had spent the entire day mulling over the offer to fund and expand their efforts. Yet, he knew this decision couldn't be his alone. Standing, Henry addressed the group, his voice steady. "I need everyone to listen and share their thoughts. I've received an offer from Robert Kane, a benefactor who wants to help us expand our work. He can bring resources, but it would mean giving up some of our independence." The group exchanged murmurs, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Tom exhaled smoke from his cigarette, shaking his head. "Look, Henry, I've been out here long enough to know that without money or support, we won't get far. I don't care who this Kane guy is as long as he doesn't turn us into pawns for his own agenda." Mary, usually quiet, spoke softly but firmly. "I agree with Tom, but I'm scared. Taking the money might mean losing control. People like us are used to having decisions made for us." Jack shrugged, his tone laced with sarcasm. "What's there to think about? Take the money. If they want us to play by their rules, so what? At least we'll have food, shelter, and a break from dealing with guys like Red." Emma, ever the voice of reason, placed a reassuring hand on Henry's shoulder. "Mr. Henry, this is a chance to do more for the people around us. But I think we should set clear conditions with Mr. Kane. If he genuinely wants to help, he'll respect our principles." Henry gazed at the familiar faces in the circle, each reflecting a unique perspective, all valid in their own way. After a long pause, he stepped forward into the firelight, his voice resolute. I spent most of my life letting money dictate everything. I know how dangerous it is to let others control your life. But I also know that without help, we can't reach more people. He looked at each person in turn, his gaze firm yet understanding. I'll meet Robert Kane, I'll accept his support, but only if we keep our independence. If he doesn't agree, we'll walk away, no matter how hard it gets. The group fell silent before nodding one by one. Tom smirked, flicking ash from his cigarette. All right, Henry, if that's your call, I'm in. Mary offered a gentle smile, while Jack shrugged indifferently as if conceding to the inevitable. Emma gripped Henry's hand, her eyes glowing with encouragement. I trust you to do the right thing. _ 2 days later, Henry met Robert Kane at a small cafe downtown. Kane, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a sleek leather briefcase, exuded confidence and professionalism. Mr. Henry, Kane said warmly, extending his hand. I'm glad you agreed to meet. I've been looking forward to this. Henry sat, his calloused hands resting on the table. Thank you, Robert. But before we discuss working together, I need to make a few things clear. Leaning back in his chair, Robert arched an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. Of course. Go ahead. Henry met his gaze steadily, his voice measured but firm. We're not a professional charity. We don't want to be a tool for someone to boost their reputation. If you want to help, I'll be grateful, but we will retain full control over how we operate. No one outside our group will dictate how we help people. Robert was silent for a moment, studying Henry as though testing his sincerity. Then, a smile spread across his face, and he nodded. I understand. I respect that, and I think you've made a wise decision. My support isn't about control, it's about empowering people with your determination. Henry exhaled quietly, though his guard remained up. Then we'll work together. But if I see anything that goes against our principles, I'll walk away immediately. Robert extended his hand again, sealing the agreement. Deal _ As Henry left the cafe, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a growing sense of responsibility. This was the start of a new chapter, not just for him, but for everyone who had placed their trust in him. Reaching into his pocket, Henry touched the familiar shape of his old fountain pen and murmured to himself, "This time, I won't let everything fall apart." With funding from Robert Kane, Henry and his team decided to organize a large event, a community outreach under the Manhattan Bridge. They would not only provide hot meals, but also distribute warm clothes, blankets, and essential winter supplies. Robert offered media support, and several local news outlets agreed to cover the event. Henry knew this was an opportunity to make a bigger impact, but he also felt immense pressure. That morning, the space under the Manhattan Bridge transformed. Long tables were set up in rows, laden with trays of steaming food and pre-packed supply bags. A group of young volunteers from Robert's organization was also present to lend a hand. Emma was busy directing everyone as they set up, while Henry stood quietly to one side, observing. Emma, Mr. Henry, we're almost ready. I think today is going to be amazing. Henry offered a faint smile, but his eyes were pensive. Henry, I hope so. But I'm worried that all this attention might take away from what we started: genuine compassion. Emma placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her voice gentle but firm. Emma, Mr. Henry, what we're doing comes from the heart. As long as we hold on to that, no one can take the meaning away. Henry nodded, though his concern lingered as he noticed a news van pulling up nearby. The homeless began gathering, guided into orderly lines to receive food and pick out clothes that suited their needs. The atmosphere grew livelier than usual. Mary, with her kind smile, handed a thick winter coat to a young boy. Mary, here, try this on, it'll keep you warm all winter. The boy hesitated for a moment before offering a shy smile, his small hands trembling as he took the coat. At another table, Tom served hot soup, his face unusually serene. Jack, despite his tendency to grumble, worked tirelessly, handing out bread rolls while muttering occasionally. Jack, so many people. I've never seen this many before. Henry walked along the line, taking in the weary faces that slowly brightened with each act of kindness. An older man grasped Henry's hand, his voice trembling. Man, thank you. I don't know how I would have made it through this winter without you. Henry held the man's hand firmly, his voice warm. Henry, it's nothing. We just want to help. As the event proceeded smoothly, a reporter from a local news channel approached Henry. The young woman, holding a microphone and exuding sharp curiosity, began her questions. Reporter: Mr. Henry, this is such a meaningful event. Can you share what inspired you to start this project? Henry hesitated briefly, the glare of the camera lights making him feel uneasy. Taking a deep breath, he replied, Henry, I've lost everything before, and in my darkest moments, I realized the true value of kindness. I was saved by someone's compassion, and now I want to do the same for others. The reporter nodded, admiration gleaming in her eyes. Reporter: What do you think is the most important aspect of helping the community? Henry glanced around, his eyes landing on Emma, Tom, Mary, and the others. Henry: It's sincerity. No one wants to feel pitied, but everyone deserves a chance to stand back up. The key is to treat them as equals, as fellow human beings. Henry's answer left the reporter silent for a moment. She nodded appreciatively, thanking him before moving on to interview others. Just as everything seemed to be going well, a familiar voice rang out from the distance. Red Hair and his group appeared, their expressions more annoyed than confrontational this time. Red Hair: Well, look who it is, Mr. Henry playing charity again. And now you've even got TV cameras. Guess you're aiming for fame, huh? Henry turned to face him, his expression steady. Henry, I'm not doing this for fame. You know that. Red Hair smirked, stepping closer. Red Hair: Oh yeah, but don't you think all this is messing with business for guys like me? Emma stepped forward, positioning herself between Henry and Red Hair. Her voice was strong. Emma, we're not here to compete with you. If you want to help, we welcome it. But if you're just here to cause trouble, I suggest you leave. Emma's words made Red Hair pause. He glanced around, noticing the gazes of the homeless fixed on him. After a tense moment, he scoffed, turned, and walked away, leaving the atmosphere noticeably lighter. When the event finally wrapped up, Henry stood back and watched as everyone cleaned up. The food distribution had been a resounding success, but he knew this was only the beginning. Emma joined him, standing by his side. Emma: Today was incredible, Mr. Henry. But I know you're still worried. Henry offered a faint smile, his gaze distant. Henry: I am, Emma. But I also know that as long as we hold on to our faith, nothing is impossible. Under the fading glow of the sunset, Henry felt a growing sense of hope take root in his heart. For the first time in years, he believed that real change was not just possible but within reach. For himself and for everyone around him. A week after the large food distribution event, the atmosphere under the Manhattan Bridge had grown livelier. The event had not only garnered media attention, but also brought in numerous offers for collaboration. Charitable organizations, small businesses, and a few individuals expressed interest in expanding efforts to help the homeless. Henry and his team realized it was time to transition from short-term actions to a long-term plan, establishing a support center for the homeless. However, the idea also came with unexpected challenges from the community and local government. Henry sat around an old wooden table Emma had brought in. The team gathered in a small group, discussing the plan. On the table lay a map of the area, with several potential locations for the center circled by Henry. Henry: We can't keep operating here forever. The bridge isn't a permanent solution, and winter is coming, which will make things even harder. I think it's time we establish a fixed location. Emma nodded, her eyes bright with determination. Emma: I agree. If we had a center, people could come not just for food but also for long-term support, job counseling, healthcare, or even just a warm place to rest. Tom leaned back in his chair, his brows furrowed. Tom: Sounds great, but where are you going to find the land and money to pull this off? Not everyone's going to be thrilled about a homeless center popping up near them. Jack crossed his arms, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Jack: Exactly. Have you thought about how the neighbors will react? Everyone's afraid the homeless will bring trouble. Henry paused, scanning the group with a thoughtful gaze. Henry: That's why we have to do this the right way. I've spoken with Robert Kane, and he's willing to provide financial support if we can find the right location. But we'll need approval from both the government and the community. Henry pointed to a spot on the map, a vacant lot near the edge of the city, once home to an abandoned warehouse. Henry: This could be a potential site. It's far from residential areas, so it wouldn't disrupt the surrounding community, and it's large enough to build a center. Emma nodded, but Mary voiced her concerns. Mary: I'm not sure the government will approve. They often see projects like this as more trouble than they're worth. Henry replied, his tone resolute. Henry: We'll present a clear plan. If they say no, we'll find another way. A few days later, Henry and Emma met with a group of local government representatives at City Hall. The meeting room was bright, but the atmosphere was tense. Standing before a panel that included officials and community representatives, Henry presented his plan with Emma's support. "Henry, we don't just want to build a support center. We want to create opportunities for the homeless to reintegrate into society. We'll provide counseling, skills training, and job support." A middle-aged man, representing the local district, frowned. "Representative, it sounds good on paper, but who's to say this center won't turn into a hotspot for disorder? Local residents have already voiced concerns about bringing homeless people near the area." Henry remained calm as he responded. "Henry, I understand your concerns. But instead of having homeless individuals scattered on the streets, a center like this would bring order. We'll work closely with authorities to ensure proper management." The representative raised an eyebrow, but said nothing further. Another official, a stern-looking woman, spoke up. "Official, this project will require significant resources. Who will take responsibility if it fails? And why should we trust that your team can deliver?" Henry took a deep breath, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "Henry, because I've failed before, and I know I can't afford to fail again. This isn't just a project, it's a chance for me and many others to rebuild our lives. We're not asking for permission out of pity. We're asking because it's the right thing to do." Despite the meeting, Henry and his team faced continued opposition from some residents. A community meeting was held to hear public opinions, and tensions quickly rose in the room. A man stood up, his voice sharp with frustration. "Resident, why should we have to deal with this? Homeless people will bring nothing but problems, crime, insecurity. I don't want my family living near that," another woman added. "Woman, we're not against helping the homeless, but do it somewhere else far from our neighborhood." Emma stood, her eyes blazing with passion. "Emma, you talk about safety, but the truth is, homeless individuals are far more likely to be attacked and abandoned than anyone else. This center isn't to cause trouble, it's to give them a chance to become part of society again." Henry stepped forward, his voice calm yet firm. "Henry, we'll do everything we can to ensure the center doesn't negatively impact the community. But we need unity, because if we don't help these people, they'll remain a burden instead of becoming an opportunity." After the meeting, Henry stood outside the building, watching gray clouds gather in the sky. Emma approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Emma, do you think we have a chance?" Henry looked into the distance, his voice low but resolute. "Henry, there's always a chance, but we have to fight for it." Under the gloomy sky, Henry knew that building the center would be anything but easy. Yet, he also knew that if they succeeded, it would bring real change not just for him, but for everyone who desperately needed a chance to stand up again. 2 weeks after the community meeting, Henry and his team were still diligently negotiating with the authorities and other organizations to move forward with building the support center. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly, as they had received initial approval from several parties. But then, an unexpected obstacle emerged. A large real estate company claimed ownership of the land Henry's team intended to use. Not only did the company aim to block the project, but they also threatened legal action, putting Henry's plans at risk of being derailed entirely. Henry was sitting with Emma in the temporary office space provided by Robert Kane to give the team a place to work. On the desk lay a letter from Bright Horizon Development, a real estate company. The letter's contents were clear. Bright Horizon is the legal owner of the property, and does not consent to any activities taking place here. We demand that you immediately cease all plans and vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Emma finished reading and placed the letter on the desk, a look of unease flashing across her face. "Emma, how did they step in at this point? I've reviewed the property records, and there's nothing indicating they own it." Henry nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Henry, I don't know, but it's obvious they don't want us here. Maybe they're planning a commercial project of some kind." Emma clenched her fists. Henry gathered the team to discuss the situation. Once everyone was present, he presented the letter and explained the challenge they were facing. Tom furrowed his brow, his voice laced with skepticism. "Tom, it's the same old story, rich folks, trying to push us out. I bet they don't want homeless people anywhere near their fancy developments." Mary's voice was somber, yet resolute. "Mary, we've come too far to give up because of one letter." Jack shook his head, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Jack, Of course, it's not going to be easy. If this company is as big as they seem, they've got a whole army of lawyers. And us, we're just a group of people who can barely afford dinner. Emma interjected, her voice firm. Emma, we have the truth. If this land isn't theirs, we have the right to keep going. But we'll need a lawyer to stand up to them. Henry nodded and turned to Robert Kane, who had been silently listening from the beginning. Henry, Mr. Kane, what do you think? You've dealt with things like this before. Robert tapped his fingers on the table, his voice contemplative. Robert, Bright Horizon is a powerful company. They're known for using legal tactics to intimidate opponents. But if we can prove that the land isn't theirs, we can win. Tom scoffed, taking a drag from his cigarette. Tom, the problem is, do we have the time or money to fight them? Henry looked around the room, his eyes filled with determination. Henry, we'll fight. This isn't just about the land. It's about the people we're trying to help. I won't let them push us out, so Emma and Robert immediately began working to gather evidence. They reviewed property records, reached out to the city's asset management office, and spoke to longtime residents in the area. Emma discovered that the land had previously been owned by an old industrial warehouse, but had been abandoned for over a decade. Some records indicated it had been transferred to city management after the previous company went bankrupt. Emma, if the land belongs to the city, Bright Horizon can't claim ownership. We just need to prove it. Robert agreed but cautioned. Robert, I'm certain Bright Horizon will try to muddy the waters and drag things out. They know our team doesn't have the resources for a long fight. News of the dispute quickly spread, and the local community became divided. Some supported Henry's team, while others worried that a legal battle would bring more complications to the area. At a community meeting, a man stood up, his voice agitated. Resident, we don't need a support center that brings trouble with these big companies. If they want the land, let them have it. At least we'll avoid legal issues. An elderly woman protested, her voice full of passion. Elderly woman. But this center is a beacon of hope for so many people. If we don't fight, they'll be left behind forever. Henry rose to his feet, his voice calm yet resolute. Henry, we're not looking for trouble. But if we give up, we'll lose the chance to make a difference. I'm not just fighting for myself, I am fighting for everyone who needs a place to start over. Henry's words silenced some of the dissent, but he knew not everyone would stand by his side. As night fell, Henry sat alone at the wooden desk. Spread out before him were the documents and notes Emma and Robert had collected. He knew this battle wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he couldn't back down. Emma approached, sitting down beside him. Her voice was gentle. Emma, we'll get through this, Mr. Henry. I believe in you. Henry gave a faint smile, his eyes reflecting his determination. Henry, I've lost everything once. This time I'm not losing anything else. Under the dim light, Henry tightened his grip on his fountain pen, a symbol of his resolve and belief that, with perseverance, justice would prevail. 2 weeks after receiving the letter from Bright Horizon, Henry, Emma, and Robert Kane attended a direct negotiation with the company's legal representatives. The meeting took place in an opulent conference room at Bright Horizon's headquarters, a towering skyscraper with a modern yet cold interior. The tension in the room was palpable. On Bright Horizon's side, a sharp-looking middle-aged man sat at the head of the table. He was Lawrence Hunt, the company's chief legal officer. Henry looked around, feeling the stark contrast. On one side were himself and Emma, with their simplicity and sincerity. On the other, a team of lawyers radiating confidence and precision. Lawrence leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning Henry and his team before he spoke in a deep, commanding voice. Lawrence, thank you for coming. However, I think we can save time if you accept the reality that this land belongs to Bright Horizon. Your project is clearly Robert Kane straightened his posture, his gaze sharp as he responded. Robert, we've reviewed the property records, and there's no evidence that Bright Horizon owns this land. In fact, it's under the management of the city. If you claim ownership, I hope you have sufficient proof. Lawrence gave a faint smile, tinged with mockery. Lawrence, we don't need to provide proof to you. The issue isn't ownership, it's that your project will lower the value of surrounding properties. We can't allow that to happen. Emma, seated next to Henry, bristled with indignation. Emma, lower property values. You're worried about real estate profits while hundreds of people are homeless. Is that how you plan to develop this community? Lawrence raised an eyebrow, his voice icy. Lawrence, Miss Bright Horizon is not responsible for solving the homeless crisis. Our duty is to protect the interests of our shareholders. Henry, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was calm yet firm. Henry, you can say whatever you want, but we're not doing this to cause trouble. We're doing this for people who can't defend themselves. If you want to stop us, you'll have to face the truth. People will see that Bright Horizon values profit over human rights. For a moment, Henry's words caught Lawrence off guard. However, he quickly regained his composure, leaning forward. Lawrence, that's a brave sentiment, Mr. Henry, but do you really think you stand a chance? A small group with no money or power, up against a company like ours. Robert immediately responded, his tone resolute. Robert, we don't need money or power to stand for the truth. If you drag this into a prolonged legal battle, be prepared to face public backlash. People will see that you're trying to block a project meant to help the community. Lawrence studied Robert, a calculating glint in his eyes. Henry knew that Bright Horizon didn't want to tarnish its reputation, especially with other major projects underway in the city. Emma added, her voice gentle but firm. Emma, we're not looking for conflict. We just want to create a safe space for those without homes. If you're willing to collaborate instead of oppose, we're open to finding common ground. Lawrence remained silent for a moment, then offered a slight smile. This time, the smile lacked its earlier derision. Lawrence, I'll consider your proposal. But remember, this world doesn't operate on goodwill. Henry met Lawrence's gaze, his eyes unwavering. Henry, that's why we're here to prove that goodwill still has a place in this world. As they left the building, Emma exhaled deeply. Emma, I don't know if we convinced them, but at least we didn't back down. Robert nodded, his tone cautious. Robert, Lawrence isn't someone who compromises easily, but I think we gave him something to think about. Henry walked slowly along the sidewalk, his expression pensive. He knew that while today's meeting didn't yield a clear resolution, it was a step forward. Henry, they may have power and money, but we have the truth and determination. I believe that as long as we don't give up, we'll find a way. Under the setting sun, Henry looked up at the sky, feeling a small spark of hope within him. The fight was far from over, but he knew he wasn't alone. As long as we keep moving forward, what's right will prevail, he thought, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. A week after the tense negotiation with Bright Horizon, Henry received a call from Lawrence Hunt. Lawrence requested a private meeting to present a feasible solution to their dispute. Despite his skepticism, Henry agreed. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe, where Lawrence arrived impeccably dressed, carrying a leather briefcase. Lawrence greeted Henry with a faint smile, as he took a seat across from him. Lawrence, thank you for meeting with me. I believe we can find a better solution than dragging this out in disputes. Henry leaned forward, his voice steady and resolute. Henry, if you have a genuine solution, I'm willing to listen. But if this is just another way to pressure us into backing down, I'm afraid this conversation will lead nowhere. Lawrence raised an eyebrow, as though appraising Henry's confidence. He pulled a document from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Lawrence, Bright Horizon is willing to let you proceed with your project under certain conditions. Henry frowned as he opened the document. It was a cooperation agreement that detailed Bright Horizon's involvement. The terms explicitly stated that the company would take over management of the support center once it was built. Lawrence, we'll fund the entire construction of the center. In exchange, Bright Horizon will oversee its operation. That means you and your team will no longer have direct control. Henry closed the document, his expression icy. Henry, so, you want to turn this project into a PR tool for your company? Lawrence shrugged, his tone indifferent. Lawrence, we don't deny that Bright Horizon's image will benefit, but that's irrelevant compared to ensuring the center is built and properly managed. In the end, the homeless will still benefit. Henry stared directly at Lawrence, his voice unwavering. Henry, the homeless don't need a center, that's just a corporate branding exercise. They need a place that truly belongs to them, not one controlled by commercial interests. Leaning back in his chair, Lawrence's gaze grew colder. Lawrence, if you refuse, we'll continue pursuing legal action. I'm afraid your team doesn't have the resources for a prolonged fight. This is the best offer you'll get. Henry fell silent, his thoughts a storm of conflicting emotions. He knew that rejecting the proposal could stall their project indefinitely, but accepting it would mean losing the autonomy and purpose behind the center. After the meeting, Henry gathered his team in their temporary office to discuss the proposal. The atmosphere was heavier than ever. Emma spoke first, her voice filled with concern. Emma, I don't trust them. Bright Horizon just wants to use the center for their own gain. We can't let them take control. Tom nodded in agreement. Tom, Emma's right. Once we let them in, they'll make it all about themselves. Everything we've worked for will be meaningless. As usual, Jack stood with his arms crossed, his tone pragmatic. Jack, but we need the money. We need the resources. Do you really think we can build this center without their help? If we say no, this project might never happen. Mary, usually quiet, spoke up this time. Her voice was soft but resolute. Mary, we've come so far, and I don't want to give up, but I also don't want to see the center become something that doesn't belong to us. Henry sat silently for a long time, his gaze moving from one teammate to the next. Each opinion carried its own truth, and he knew the final decision rested on his shoulders. That evening, Henry sat alone in the office, his familiar fountain pen in hand. He scribbled words on a scrap of paper. Hold on to faith, but don't squander opportunity. He realized that to stand up to Bright Horizon, he needed a new strategy, a solution that preserved their autonomy while ensuring the project moved forward. The next morning, Henry called Lawrence Hunt. His voice was calm but firm. Henry, we won't abandon this project, and we won't let you control it. But if Bright Horizon truly wants to support us, do it without strings attached. If you refuse, we're prepared to fight this to the end. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Lawrence responded. Lawrence, a bold stance. Mr. Henry, very well, let's see who has more patience. The battle between Henry and Bright Horizon was far from over, but Henry knew he had made the right choice. As he hung up the phone, Henry looked out the window at the rising sun. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They may have money and power, but we have conviction and truth, Henry thought, and as long as we stand firm, we'll find a way. Following the tense negotiation with Bright Horizon, Henry and his team continued their work despite the mounting pressure from the company. News of the land dispute began to spread, capturing the attention of the local community and media. One gloomy morning, Henry received an unexpected call from someone he never thought would take his side. Michael Harper, his former loyal assistant from his days as a successful businessman. Henry held the phone, his voice tinged with surprise. Henry, Michael, I never thought I'd hear your voice again. On the other end, Michael's voice was warm, filled with emotion. Michael, Henry, I read about you in the papers, and heard about what you're doing. I just want to say how proud I am of you. And I want to help. Henry frowned, curiosity lacing his tone. Henry, help. I thought you left the industry for good. Michael chuckled lightly. Michael, I did, but I still have a few connections. I also have a small team working on non-profit projects. They can help you dig into the legal details of the land and find Bright Horizon's weak spots. Henry was silent for a moment, sensing the sincerity in Michael's voice. He exhaled, his voice soft. Henry, thank you, Michael. I never thought you'd come back to help me after everything that happened. Michael's tone was firm. Michael, Henry, I left because I couldn't agree with how you were running things back then, but the person you are now, that's why I'm here. Let me help you this time. A few days later, Michael met Henry and his team at their temporary office. Michael's professional demeanor and confidence were palpable as he dove into the work. He brought with him a comprehensive set of legal documents on the disputed land and pointed out a critical detail. Michael, the land does belong to the city, and Bright Horizon doesn't have ownership rights. But there's a catch. They've submitted a proposal to use the land for a commercial project, and the city is reviewing it. Emma's brow furrowed, her voice rising with frustration. Emma, they're trying to claim it before we can start our project. Michael nodded but quickly reassured her. Michael, however, the city is also evaluating the feasibility of your project. If we can prove that Henry's Support Center offers greater benefits to the community, we have a real chance of stopping Bright Horizon. Robert Kane stepped forward, placing a hand on Henry's shoulder. Robert, that means we need support from the community and from organizations. If we apply enough pressure, the city will have to side with us. Henry nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Emma and her team began organizing meetings with local residents to explain the project. Though Henry wasn't used to public speaking, he joined to share his story and vision. At a community meeting, Henry stood before a group of residents, his voice steady yet filled with sincerity. Henry, I know there are concerns about our center, But I want you to know that we're not just building a shelter. We're building an opportunity for people who've lost everything and are trying to rebuild their lives." A middle-aged man stood up, his voice tinged with doubt. "Resident. But who's to say this center won't cause trouble? How can we be sure we'll be safe?" Emma stepped forward, her fiery determination evident in her eyes. "Emma, we promise. With all our dedication and responsibility, we'll ensure this center brings hope, not problems. But we need your help to make it happen." Emma's words softened the tension in the room. An elderly woman stood up, her voice gentle but resolute. "Elderly woman, I lost my son because he had nowhere to turn. If this center can save even one life, I will support it." Applause erupted, and gradually, more people voiced their agreement. News of Henry's campaign spread quickly, attracting attention from nonprofit organizations and small businesses in the area. Several groups began sending letters of support, and one local business even volunteered to provide construction materials for free if the project was approved. Watching the progress, Michael turned to Henry, a faint smile on his face. "Michael, you've done it, Henry. I think we have a real chance now." Henry smiled back, though his eyes reflected his unwavering resolve. "Henry, we've come far, but the fight isn't over yet. I won't stop until this center becomes a reality." Standing outside the office, Henry watched the flow of people on the street. For the first time, he felt that, despite Bright Horizons' formidable presence, he wasn't alone in this battle. "I've lost everything before, but this time, I'll fight for what's right," he thought. Under the dim light of the setting sun, Henry clenched his familiar fountain pen, ready for the next steps in the journey ahead. With mounting pressure from the community and organizations supporting Henry, Bright Horizon accelerated the timeline for their commercial project on the disputed land. The real estate company submitted a comprehensive proposal to the city, outlining plans for a modern shopping center. This move not only caught Henry and his team off guard but also put their project at a disadvantage, as the city's decision deadline loomed closer. During a brief meeting, Michael delivered the unsettling news, placing a file on the table. His voice carried a note of urgency. "Michael, Bright Horizon has finalized their proposal. They're pushing the city to prioritize their project. If it gets approved first, we'll lose this land forever." Emma turned to Henry, her eyes reflecting both confusion and concern. "Emma, what do we do now? They have so many resources. If the city sides with them, it's all over." Henry sat in silence, his hands clasped tightly around his familiar fountain pen. After a few moments of contemplation, he looked up, his gaze resolute. "Henry, we can't wait. If they're moving quickly, we have to move faster. We'll present our plan in the most compelling way possible, and show that our center offers real, tangible value to the community." Henry and his team worked tirelessly, preparing for the ultimate showdown with the city council, where both proposals would be reviewed. Emma began gathering personal stories from homeless individuals who had been helped by their team. Each story highlighted the transformative impact the support center could have on people's lives. Michael focused on preparing the legal documentation and comparative data between the two projects. He emphasized that Bright Horizons shopping center would only generate profit for a select few, while the support center would provide long-lasting benefits to the community. Tom and Mary went door to door in the area, rallying local residents to support the project. Many people, including former opponents, began signing a petition in favor of Henry's center. The final decision day arrived in a packed city council chamber. The room was filled with representatives from Bright Horizon, Henry's team, local residents, and members of the press. Lawrence Hunt led Bright Horizon's delegation, exuding his usual confident demeanor. He began his presentation, emphasizing the economic benefits of their project. "Lawrence, we are offering an opportunity for economic growth that this city cannot afford to ignore. This is not just a project tie, it's a major step forward for the community." Some scattered applause broke out among Bright Horizon supporters, but quickly faded as Henry rose to speak. Henry took a deep breath, steadying himself before addressing the council. His voice was warm, steady, and full of conviction. "Henry, I was once at the pinnacle of success, and I lost everything. But it was in that loss that I learned the true value of life. It's not about what we take, but about what we give." He gestured toward the homeless individuals sitting behind him. "Henry, the center we propose is not just a shelter. It's a place where those who've lost everything can rebuild their lives and become contributing members of society. This is how we create a real community." Emma stepped forward and played a short video, showcasing the stories of homeless individuals who had turned their lives around with the team's help. The room fell silent, the poignant images and voices moving everyone present. As the video ended, an elderly woman on the council sighed, her voice soft but resolute. "Councilwoman, this is what I want to see. Not just profit, but real value for people." Lawrence stood, attempting to counter. "Lawrence, madam, I respect your sentiments, but emotions cannot build the future. We need to focus on reality, and the reality is that the shopping center will generate far greater revenue." Henry turned to Lawrence, his voice calm yet firm. "Henry, the reality is that if we don't help the vulnerable, we lose the very essence of what makes us a community. Money can build structures, but only compassion can build trust and unity." After hours of deliberation, the city council retreated to a private chamber for the vote. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited. When the representatives returned, the council president announced the decision. "Council President, after careful consideration of both proposals, we have decided to approve the Community Support Center proposed by Mr. Henry's team." Cheers erupted from Henry's team and their supporters. Emma embraced Henry, while Tom and Mary cheered with joy. Lawrence remained still, his expression cold as he watched Henry. Before leaving, he remarked with an edge in his voice, "Lawrence, you've won this time. But remember, justice doesn't always prevail." Standing outside the city council building, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow, Emma took Henry's hand. "Emma, we did it, Mr. Henry. This is a new beginning." Henry smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting both relief and determination. "Henry, yes, but the real work is just beginning." Under the radiant sunlight, Henry felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This time, his victory was not just for himself, but for everyone who had placed their trust in him, and in the promise of a better future. "I've lost everything before," he thought, "but this time, I fought for what's right and we won." Clutching his fountain pen tightly, Henry prepared for the journey ahead, knowing that their shared fight was far from over but filled with hope. Despite receiving financial support from Robert Kane and several nonprofit organizations, the process of building the center was far from easy. Budget formulas, tight timelines, and lingering doubts from some residents placed immense pressure on Henry and his team. Standing in the middle of the construction site, Henry observed trucks delivering building materials as the piercing sound of steel cutters filled the air, creating an atmosphere both lively and tense. Emma approached, holding a folder. "Emma, Mr. Henry, we're running into cost issues. The initial estimates were lower than reality. Some necessary materials and equipment have spiked in price. If we don't find a solution, we'll have to shrink the budget significantly." Henry frowned, his gaze settling on the unfinished foundation. He knew that any delays could damage the team's credibility and jeopardize the project. Tom and Jack joined the discussion, Jack shrugging, with a hint of sarcasm. "Told you, building without enough money is like fighting barehanded. Now we're out of funds, what's the plan? Shut it down." Tom interrupting firmly, "We've come too far to stop now. If needed, I'll work overtime with the workers to save costs. But Henry, you'll have to secure more support." Henry nodded, deep in thought before replying, "Henry, I'll talk to Robert Kane and a few other organizations. If no one steps up, we'll have to cut some non-essential items." Emma looked at Henry, her eyes a mix of worry and determination. "Emma, I'll find a way to mobilize more support from the community. If everyone contributes a little, we can make it through." Emma launched an online campaign, sharing the team's story, photos of the site's progress, and touching testimonials from homeless individuals who had been helped. Tom and Mary canvassed nearby neighborhoods seeking donations. At first, many were hesitant, but the pair's passion and sincerity eventually won over many supporters. One day, Henry received a letter from a local high school student. Enclosed was $50 and a note. "I don't have much, but I want to help. Everyone deserves a place to call home." Henry read the letter, his eyes briefly welling with tears. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but they weren't fighting alone. Meanwhile, some residents continued to voice concerns about the project. A small group sent letters to the city council, demanding a halt to construction, citing safety concerns. Henry arranged a meeting with George Miller, a businessman who owned a store near the site and one of the opposition leaders. Their conversation took place at a small cafe. George's gaze was cold as he addressed Henry. "George, Mr. Henry, I don't understand why you're so stubborn. We don't want this center to disrupt the neighborhood. Henry calmly, Mr. George, I understand your concerns. But instead of viewing this center as a problem, consider it a solution. The homeless don't want to be a burden, they just need a chance to start over. George crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. George, and who's to guarantee they won't cause trouble? Who ensures your center won't become a hub for crime? Henry, taking a deep breath, speaking firmly, I guarantee it. We will manage this center with utmost responsibility and care, but I need your support, or at least your tolerance. George remained silent for a long moment before exhaling softly. George, fine, I'll give you a chance. But if this center causes problems, I'll be the first to demand its closure. Henry nodded, grateful for even a slight easing of opposition. With growing community support and the team's tireless efforts, construction began to pick up pace. Walls rose, roofs were installed, and the interior started taking shape, hinting at a space that felt like home. Tom, once a homeless man himself, now led the construction team with enthusiasm. Mary managed the materials warehouse, while Jack, despite his occasional grumbling, was always the first to show up in emergencies. Emma documented every moment, from the sweat dripping from workers' brows to the smiles of pride when progress was made. One evening, after everyone had left, Henry stood alone on the unfinished site. He could already imagine its completion, a warm, hopeful place for those who had lost their way. Emma approached and stood beside him, her voice soft. Emma. Mr. Henry, what do you think? Henry smiling, his eyes bright. I think this dream is becoming a reality. And I know when this center opens, it won't just change the lives of the homeless, but also of those who helped build it. Under the starry sky, Henry felt a profound sense of belief. Every effort is worth it. After months of tireless effort, the support center led by Henry and his team was finally completed. What was once an abandoned warehouse had transformed into a warm, welcoming building with clean and organized spaces. The center featured several areas: a large dining hall, small dormitories for the homeless, a job counseling room, and a communal living area. The grand opening took place on a winter morning, with light snow blanketing the streets. The event drew local residents, formerly homeless individuals who had been helped, charitable organizations, and even some media outlets. Henry stood in front of the building, watching the crowd gather. A large banner hung over the entrance, bearing the simple message, "A place where hope begins anew." Emma walked up to him, her smile radiant. Emma, everything's ready. Today is a special day, Mr. Henry. Do you think you might say a few words? Henry chuckled softly, though his eyes betrayed his nerves. Henry, I've never been good at public speaking, Emma. But if it's needed, I'll do it. When everyone had settled, Emma stepped onto a small stage set up in front of the center. Holding a microphone, her warm voice carried through the air. Emma, thank you all for being here today. This center is the result of faith, unity, and relentless effort from all of us. She turned to Henry, her eyes full of encouragement. Emma, and now, I'd like to invite someone we all know well, the man who envisioned and led this project, Mr. Henry. Applause rang out as Henry walked onto the stage. He took a deep breath, looked out at the crowd, and began. Henry, I was once a man who had everything, and then I lost it all. But it was at my lowest point that I realized the true value of life, helping those around us. He paused, his gaze resting on the homeless individuals standing at the front. Henry, this center doesn't belong to MIT, belongs to you. It's a place for those who have lost their way to find hope again, to start anew. And I promise that we will do everything in our power to make this a true home for anyone who needs it. The applause this time was louder, more fervent. Henry felt a weight lift from his shoulders. After the ceremony, the center began welcoming its first homeless residents. Henry and his team busied themselves guiding newcomers to their dormitories, assisting with registration, and distributing essential supplies. Tom, once a lost and homeless man himself, now managed the dormitories. He moved through the rooms, ensuring everything was tidy and orderly. Tom, this isn't just a shelter, it's a place to rebuild. Respect it, and respect each other. In the kitchen, Mary prepared hot meals with care, while Jack, despite his habitual grumbling, was the first to carry supplies and set up furniture. Emma greeted new volunteers, while Henry counseled those in need of jobs or legal assistance. Though things went smoothly at first, Henry soon realized the operational challenges of running the center. One evening, Emma entered his office holding a stack of files. Emma, Mr. Henry, we're facing an issue with the number of people coming to the center. Right now, we don't have enough rooms. Some are sleeping in the common areas. Henry frowned, his voice tinged with concern. Henry, we anticipated this, but I didn't expect it to happen so soon. Is there any temporary solution? Emma, I'll reach out to other organizations to request additional temporary shelters, but long term, we need to expand the center. Henry sighed, but quickly regained his composure. Henry, all right, do what you can for now. I'll work on securing more resources. A week later, Tom reported a conflict between two residents. Henry hurried to the communal area, where a middle-aged man and a young man were arguing heatedly. Tom was trying to mediate, but neither would back down. Henry stepped in, his voice calm yet authoritative. Henry, stop this immediately. This is not a place for fighting. If you want to stay here, you must respect each other. The older man spoke first, his tone indignant. Man, he took my things. That's not how we're supposed to treat each other here. The young man lowered his head, his voice quiet. Young man, I only borrowed them, but he wouldn't let me explain. Henry remained composed and addressed them both. Henry, if we can't trust each other, this center will fail. This is a place for support, not division. I'll arrange a mediation session to resolve this, but for now, try to keep the peace. Gradually, the tension eased, and Henry felt a wave of relief. That night, Henry sat alone in his office, gazing out at the newly completed building. He realized that the hardest part wasn't building the center, it was sustaining it, ensuring it remained a place of hope. Emma entered, offering a gentle smile. Emma, long day, huh? Henry smiling faintly, yes, but I've never felt my work was this meaningful. Under the starry sky, Henry knew his journey wasn't over, it had only just begun. The support center, under Henry's leadership, had been operational for 3 months. In this short time, it became a beacon of hope in the community, not only a refuge for the homeless, but a place that helped them rediscover purpose in life. However, success brought complexity. Some local residents continued their opposition, claiming the center was a nuisance. Meanwhile, a group of small business owners in the area began lobbying the authorities to reconsider the center's operations, arguing it was detrimental to commercial growth. Henry entered the communal hall one morning, where a group of homeless individuals was participating in a job counseling session led by Emma. She was explaining how to write resumes, while Mary and Tom organized the materials. An older man with a hesitant demeanor raised his hand from the end of the table. Man, I haven't worked in over 10 years. Who's going to hire someone like me? Emma smiled warmly and approached him, her voice gentle. Emma, everyone deserves a chance. We'll help you write your resume and practice for interviews. What's most important is that you believe you can do it. Henry watched quietly, his heart swelling with pride. As he left the room, Tom approached with a serious expression. Tom, Henry, I just heard from Jack. There are some residents gathered outside. They're holding signs and asking to speak with you. Henry frowning. What do they want? Tom, they're claiming the center is causing disruptions and hurting their businesses. Do you want me to handle it? Henry shaking his head, his voice firm. No, I'll handle it. If they have concerns, I want to hear them directly. Henry stepped out to the center's main entrance, where a group of residents stood holding signs with slogans like, "End the inconvenience," and "No to neighborhood nuisances." At the front was George Miller, the businessman who had reluctantly agreed to the center's establishment. Seeing Henry, George marched forward, his tone accusatory. George, Henry, I warned you, this center is causing trouble. Homeless people are wandering around, bothering our customers. Henry remaining calm. Mr. George, I understand your concerns, but we've done everything to ensure the center is well managed. If there are issues, we should work together to find solutions. A woman in the crowd interrupted, her voice sharp. Woman, solutions. The solution is to shut this place down. We don't want to live next to those people. Her words stopped Henry in his tracks. He looked at the crowd, sensing the fear and prejudice in their eyes. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady and resolute. Emma, the people you're talking about aren't the problem there. People who need help. This center doesn't just benefit them, it benefits the entire community, by helping them reintegrate into society. George frowned, but murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some seemed swayed by Emma's words. Henry continued, his tone measured. Henry, if you have concerns, I'm willing to organize a meeting to discuss them. But instead of placing blame, Let's work together to find solutions." George studied Henry for a moment before sighing heavily. "George, fine. We'll wait and see how you handle this. But if things don't improve, I'll push the city council to intervene." As the crowd dispersed, Henry returned to the center, a heavy weight on his shoulders. Tom approached, his tone thoughtful. "Tom, they don't understand that we're doing something good here, but Henry, the way you handled that tit earned my respect." Henry smiling faintly. "Thanks, Tom, but this isn't over. We need to prove that this center is part of the solution, not the problem." In the weeks that followed, Henry and his team focused on strengthening the center's operations. They organized workshops to teach the homeless how to integrate into the community, and collaborated with local law enforcement to ensure security. Emma arranged an open house event, inviting local residents to visit the center and see its work firsthand. The event featured personal stories from those who had been helped by the center. Ryan, a young man, stood before the crowd. His voice was shaky but full of emotion. "Ryan, I used to be an addict with nowhere to go. But this center gave me a second chance. Today, I have a job, a home, and hope." Ryan's words softened the atmosphere. Some residents began to change their perspectives, and a few even volunteered to help at the center. That evening, Henry sat in his office, looking at photos from the event. Emma entered and placed a cup of coffee on his desk. "Emma, today was a good day, wasn't it?" Henry smiling lightly. "It was, but there's still a lot to do. Prejudice doesn't disappear overnight." "Emma, true, but we're on the right path. And Mr. Henry, because of you, so many people have found hope again." Henry gazed out the window at the center, its lights shining brightly in the dark. He knew the journey was far from over, but every step forward was worth it. Hope isn't just the light at the end of the tunnel, it's the flame we carry in our hands. A year after its grand opening, Henry's support center had become a symbol of hope in the community. Over 150 homeless individuals had found jobs, secured stable housing, and reintegrated into society. Many others continued to benefit from the center's programs. However, this success made the center a target for those looking to exploit or dismantle it. A powerful real estate corporation, a rival to Bright Horizon, began quietly lobbying to acquire the center's land to build a luxury apartment complex. One morning, Henry received a letter from the city government. As he opened it, his heart sank. "We have received a proposal to repurpose the current site of the support center. This proposal comes from Westwood Development, which plans to build a luxury apartment complex. We request your attendance at a hearing to justify maintaining the current use of the property." Emma entered the office and noticed Henry intently reading the letter, his face filled with tension. "Emma, what's going on, Mr. Henry?" Henry handed her the letter, his voice heavy. "Henry, we have a problem. Westwood Development wants this land. They're lobbying the government to take it from us." Emma frowned, anger flashing in her eyes. "Emma, they can't do this. This center has helped hundreds of people. How can they even think about destroying it for apartments?" Henry shook his head. "Henry, they have money, power, and no regard for the people we're helping. We need to prepare, Emma. If we don't, we could lose everything." Henry called an emergency meeting with his team. Robert Kane, though no longer directly involved in financing the center, attended to offer strategic advice. "Robert, Westwood Development is a powerful opponent. They have connections in government, and will use every tool to push this project forward. But we have an advantage. The center has already proven its value." Michael, the lawyer who had helped Henry in previous legal battles. "We need to gather data showing the center's positive impact, jobs created, lives transformed, and community support." Emma, her voice resolute, added, "Emma, I'll organize a major event. We'll invite people who've been helped by the center to share their stories. We need to make everyone see how important this place is." Henry looked around the room, seeing the determination in everyone's eyes. He knew this fight would be even harder than the last, but he wasn't alone. Emma spearheaded a media campaign, leveraging social media and local news outlets to tell the center's story. A short video was released, featuring people whose lives had been transformed by the center. In one segment, Ryan, a young man who had once been homeless, spoke emotionally. "Ryan, without the center, I don't know where I'd be today. It's not just a shelter. It's a place that helped me find myself again." The video quickly went viral, drawing thousands of views and widespread support. Articles advocating for the center appeared in major publications, and several nonprofit organizations pledged legal assistance if needed. On the day of the city hearing, the atmosphere was tense. Representatives from Westwood Development and the center sat on opposite sides of the room. Martin Grayson, Westwood's spokesperson, presented their case with polished confidence. Martin, our project will bring a luxury apartment complex to this area, creating hundreds of jobs and increasing property values. We believe this is the kind of progress the city needs. His words were met with nods from some attendees. But when Henry stepped up to speak, the room grew quieter. Taking a deep breath, Henry began, his voice steady and compelling. Henry, this center is not just a building. It's hope, opportunity, and a home for those who've been forgotten. In the past year, more than 150 people have escaped homelessness thanks to this center. If you take it away, you're not just demolishing a shelter, you're destroying hope for countless lives. Emma played a short video showcasing stories of people who had been helped by the center. As the video ended, some members of the city council looked visibly moved. Then, the unexpected happened. George Miller, the businessman who had once opposed the center, stood up to speak. George, I used to think this center would cause problems, but I was wrong. Over the past year, I've seen the positive changes it's brought. The people who used to wander outside my store now have jobs and dignity. I support this center staying right where it is. George's words shifted the room's energy. Heads began to nod in agreement, and Martin Grayson's confident demeanor faltered. After the hearing, the city council announced its decision. The center would remain and its purpose would not be changed. Henry and his team breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing they had won another hard-fought battle. Emma embraced Henry, her voice choked with emotion. Emma, we did it, Mr. Henry. The center still belongs to the people who need it. That evening, Henry stood outside the center, watching the warm glow of its lights spilling into the night. Inside, a group of newly admitted children laughed and played in the communal hall. Emma joined him, her voice soft. Emma, Mr. Henry, you've changed so many lives. Henry smiling. No, Emma, we have changed their lives, and we'll keep doing it. Under the starry sky, Henry felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey was far from over, but every challenge reaffirmed their mission. Hope isn't just a fleeting moment, it's the foundation we build together. 2 years after the first center opened, Henry's model for supporting the homeless was widely recognized as a shining example of reintegration into society. Several neighboring cities had approached Henry, hoping to replicate the model. However, expansion required substantial resources, a sustainable plan, and strong leadership. Despite his passion, Henry realized that he and his team couldn't do it all alone. Sitting in his office, Henry reviewed a preliminary proposal from a nearby city, requesting a partnership to establish a similar center. Emma entered with a steaming cup of coffee. Emma, this is the third city reaching out to us this month. I think our model is making a big impact. Henry sipped his coffee, his gaze thoughtful. Henry, it is, but I'm worried we're growing too fast. This center still has issues we need to address. If we expand without a solid plan, we could fail. Emma nodded and sat down beside him. Emma, then let's take it slow. We need to find a new management team, people who share our vision and passion. If we find the right people, everything will fall into place. Henry called a meeting with the core team. Emma, Tom, Mary, Jack, Michael, and Robert Kane. Robert, still serving as an advisor, spread a map on the table. Robert, these are the cities that have approached us. I've done some preliminary research, and I think we should start with the nearest city. The need is significant, but the legal hurdles aren't too complex. Tom frowned, his tone serious. Tom, expanding is a great idea, but if we focus too much elsewhere, we might overlook problems here at the original center. Mary added thoughtfully. Mary, exactly. We need to ensure this center continues running smoothly before thinking about expansion. Emma looked around and then turned to Henry. Emma, we don't have to do everything ourselves. If we can train a local team, they can take over the new centers while we oversee and support them. Henry listened to the group's input and nodded, determination lighting up his eyes. Henry, all right, we'll pilot one new center, but only if we find the right team, and we'll develop a long-term plan to ensure sustainability. Henry and Emma traveled to the nearby city to survey the area and meet with local officials. Once a thriving industrial hub, the city had suffered economic decline after factories shut down, leaving many unemployed and homeless. They met Daniel Carter, a forward-thinking city official, who enthusiastically welcomed them and showed them an abandoned warehouse, a proposed site for the new center. "Daniel, we believe your center could transform this community. We're ready to support you with legal permits and approvals. But we need your assurance that this project will deliver real results." Henry looked around the warehouse, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. "Henry, we'll do everything we can, but we'll need support from local organizations to make this project a success. Daniel, you have my word. Let me know what you need." Back at the original center, Henry and Emma began organizing training sessions for potential team members from the new city. These sessions focus not only on operational skills but also on fostering compassion and respect for the homeless. One evening, Emma led Henry to a meeting room where the new team was practicing handling simulated scenarios. A young woman named Linda was role-playing a counseling session with a hypothetical homeless individual. "Linda, we're here to help, but you need to put in the effort too. Together, we'll figure out a way to start over." Henry watched Linda with a faint smile, feeling hopeful that they were finding people capable of carrying forward his vision. As progress on the new center gained momentum, news arrived of a local political group opposing the project. They claimed such centers were a drain on the budget. Emma entered Henry's office, her face tense. "Emma, they're spreading misinformation, saying the center will raise taxes and create security issues." Henry clenched his fists but kept his composure. "Henry, we've faced this before, and we'll face it again. Prepare our data and stories from those we've helped. We'll hold a community meeting to set the record straight." At the community meeting, Henry stood before hundreds of residents, explaining the true benefits of the center. He emphasized that the homeless were not a burden, but people in need of a chance to rebuild their lives. Linda, now part of the new team, also spoke. "Linda, I used to think the homeless were the problem until I met them. They're just like US people who need hope and a little help to start over." Personal stories and transparent data gradually swayed public opinion. Some attendees even offered to donate or volunteer for the project. Weeks later, construction began on the second center, marking a new chapter in Henry's mission. One evening, Henry stood outside the original center, watching its warm lights glow in the night. Emma joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Emma, we've come so far from where we started, haven't we?" Henry smiled, his eyes filled with pride and determination. "Henry, yes, but the journey is far from over, and I'm ready to keep going." Under the starry sky, Henry felt a profound sense of purpose, knowing they were making a real difference step by meaningful step. 5 years after the first center was founded, Henry's support model had grown into a network of 6 centers across the country. Each center served as a lifeline for the homeless, offering opportunities for reintegration and renewed hope. However, the rapid expansion brought immense challenges. Increasingly complex management, strained finances, and, most critically, the risk of losing the core values of sincerity and compassion that had driven the movement. In his office at the original center, Henry pored over a stack of financial and management reports from the other centers. Emma entered, her face clouded with concern. "Emma, Mr. Henry, we need to talk. Several of the newer centers are reporting serious issues with their management teams. They say decisions are prioritizing financial efficiency over providing support." Henry looked up, exhaustion flickering in his eyes. "Henry, I was afraid this might happen. When we expand too quickly, some of our core values can get lost." Emma placed a folder in front of him, her tone firm. "Emma, we need to act now. If we don't, everything you've worked your whole life to build will be at risk." Henry called for a leadership meeting with the directors of all the centers, connecting virtually with those in distant cities. Rachel, the young director of the Chicago Center, spoke up passionately. "Rachel, I understand that finances are a big concern, but I feel like the pressure to cut costs is causing us to overlook the real needs of the people we're here to help. That's not why I joined this mission." Mark, the director of the Texas Center, countered with a more pragmatic tone. "Mark, Rachel, I get where you're coming from, but if we don't reduce expenses, we won't survive. Reality isn't always ideal." Henry listened carefully before speaking, his voice calm yet commanding. "Henry, I know each of you is doing your best, but let's not forget why we started this. It wasn't to save every penny, it was to save every person. If these centers exist just to sustain themselves, then we've already failed." The room fell silent, Henry's words resonating deeply. Determined to address the issues firsthand, Henry decided to visit the other centers to assess the situation. Emma accompanied him, documenting their findings and gathering feedback from both staff and those receiving support. At the center in New Orleans, Henry met Lisa, a young woman who had recently found a job after living at the center for a year. Lisa shared her story. Lisa, if it weren't for this center, I'd still be on the streets, forgotten. But maybe the most valuable thing it gave me wasn't just a place to stay at, was the feeling that I mattered, that I wasn't abandoned. Lisa's words moved Henry deeply, reaffirming the importance of their mission. Yet he also observed systemic weaknesses, a lack of dedicated staff and increasingly bureaucratic processes. Meanwhile, a major funding organization sent a letter demanding changes to the center's operations, including increased efficiency and detailed financial reporting. They threatened to withdraw funding if their conditions weren't met. Robert Kane met with Henry in his office, his expression grave. "Robert, Henry, if we lose this funding, the network will be in serious jeopardy. But I also know that their conditions would strip the centers of their soul." Henry sighed, gazing out the window at the laughter of homeless children playing in the courtyard. After a moment, he turned back, his resolve clear. "Henry, we won't trade the soul of these centers for money. If they want to pull their funding, so be it. We'll find another way. But we won't let anyone turn this place into a soulless machine." Henry organized a large workshop with all center directors and staff, re-emphasizing the importance of compassion and respect. He proposed the creation of community councils at each center, allowing those who had received help to participate in decision-making processes. Emma, tasked with overseeing the reforms, spoke passionately at the workshop. "Emma, when we give a voice to those who've been helped, we're not just aiding them, we're learning from them. This is how we preserve our core values." The reforms began showing results. Reports from the centers indicated higher satisfaction among both staff and those being helped. Smaller like-minded funding organizations stepped in to fill the gap left by the larger one. At a team gathering, Linda, who had once led the new center in a nearby city, spoke up. "Linda, Henry, I used to think we wouldn't survive the pressure. But because of you, we've proven that compassion and efficiency don't have to conflict." Henry smiled warmly, his voice steady. "Henry, there's still so much work to do. But as long as we remember why we started, we'll always find our way." That evening, Henry stood on the balcony of the original center, gazing at the city lights. Emma joined him, her tone gentle. "Emma, you've built not just a network, Henry, but a true movement." Henry's smile deepened, his eyes filled with hope. "Henry, I didn't build it alone. This is the dream of everyone who believed in change. And I trust it will keep growing, even after I'm gone." Under the starry sky, Henry felt a profound certainty that his efforts weren't just about helping the homeless, they were about creating a world where everyone had a chance to start anew. Years passed, and Henry grew older. The relentless efforts he had poured into building and expanding the support centers left an indelible mark on the world, but also took a toll on his health. The support centers had become a national network, helping thousands of homeless individuals each year. Yet Henry realized it was time to pass the torch to the next generation, those who would continue the mission he had begun. Henry sat in his office at the original center, a steaming cup of tea in his hand. Emma entered with a folder in her arms. She placed it gently on the desk before him, concern flickering in her eyes. "Emma, Mr. Henry, you've been looking tired lately. You can't keep working at this pace forever. Our team is ready to take on more responsibility. Don't you think it's time to step back from leadership?" Henry looked up, his gaze reflective. After a moment of silence, he nodded slowly. "Henry, I know. Emma, I've been thinking about this a lot. But stepping away isn't easy. This center isn't just my work, it's been my life." Emma placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her voice gentle but firm. "Emma, you've done more than anyone could have hoped for. But if you want your legacy to continue, you need to empower others to carry it forward." Henry convened a meeting with the directors of all the centers in the network. Sitting at the head of the table, he looked at each face, familiar allies who had stood by him through countless challenges. When everyone had settled, Henry took a deep breath and began. "Henry, more than a decade ago, I sat under a bridge in Manhattan with nothing but regret and despair. But because of the kindness of one person, I found hope to start again. From that hope, we built something I never dared to dream of." He paused, his gaze resting on Emma, Linda, and others. "Henry, but no one can walk a journey forever. It's time for me to pass the torch to all of you, the people I trust most. You will carry this mission forward, and I know you'll do even better than I have." The room fell silent, his words resonating deeply. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "Emma, Mr. Henry, we won't let you down. And even if you're stepping back, you'll always be our guiding light." The room filled with nods of agreement, and Henry felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Henry and Emma spent months identifying and training a new leadership team, ensuring they possessed not only the skills but also the compassion needed to uphold the center's values. Linda, who had proven herself as an exceptional leader at the second center, was nominated as the network's new executive director. During their final meeting, Henry spoke to her. "Henry, Linda, I've watched how you work and how you treat people. You're not just a great leader, you have a heart for this mission. I know you'll take the center further than I ever could." Linda bowed her head slightly, her eyes shining with determination. "Linda, I won't let you down, Henry. Thank you for trusting me." The transition ceremony was held at the original center, the birthplace of the entire movement. Representatives from every center attended, along with countless individuals who had been helped over the years. Standing on a small stage, Henry addressed the crowd. "Henry, today isn't an ending, it's a new beginning. While I'm stepping back from leadership, I'll always be here, walking alongside you. Because what we've built isn't just an organization, it's a family." Applause erupted as Henry stepped off the stage, allowing Linda to take her place as the new leader. After the ceremony, Henry wandered the center's grounds, observing the life within. Children played in the common area, an older man read a book quietly, and a group of young adults practiced writing job applications. Emma approached, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Emma, do you regret it, Henry?" Henry smiled softly and shook his head. "Henry, no, Emma, I just feel grateful. Grateful for the chance to do this, and grateful that I didn't have to do it alone." Henry sat on a bench outside the center, watching the golden hues of sunset paint the sky. He knew that while he was no longer at the helm, his legacy would live on through the people he had inspired. Everyone deserves a chance to start over, he thought, a serene peace washing over him. Under the starry sky, Henry felt a profound happiness, the kind that comes from a life spent bringing hope to others. Years after Henry stepped down from leadership, the network of support centers had expanded across the nation, becoming a symbol of compassion and societal reintegration. Under Linda's guidance and the youthful leadership team, the mission Henry began continued to thrive, evolving and growing to meet new challenges. Henry now lived in a modest home near the first center. Though retired, he often visited, listening to the stories of those who had been helped and witnessing the lasting impact of the work he had started. One spring morning, Henry received a letter from Ryan, the young man who had once lived at the center. In the letter, Ryan shared that he had opened a small store and was now employing 2 formerly homeless individuals. Ryan in the letter: "Mr. Henry, I just wanted to thank you once again. Your center didn't just change my life, it taught me the value of helping others. Now, I want to continue that work. I hope one day you can visit my store." Henry read the letter with a soft smile. Emma, who still visited him frequently, entered the room and noticed the letter in his hand. "Emma, who's it from, Mr. Henry?" Henry handed her the letter, his voice warm. "Henry Ryan. He started his own business and is helping others. That's why I believe every effort we made was worth it." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "Emma, you've changed not just one life, Henry, but thousands." Henry shook his head, his gaze thoughtful. "Henry, no, Emma, we changed them. This was never just my story." 20 years after the first center was established, a grand celebration was held. Henry was invited as the guest of honor, alongside the people who had been with him from the very beginning. Linda, now the executive director of the network, took the stage to address the crowd. She glanced at Henry, seated in the front row, her eyes brimming with emotion. "Linda, if not for Mr. Henry, I don't know if we would be here today. He taught us that one person's belief in goodness can change the world." Turning to the audience, which included hundreds who had been helped by the centers, she continued, "Linda, but more than that, he taught us about hope, and hope is the greatest gift we can give each other." Thunderous applause filled the hall as Henry, now frail but sitting tall, smiled with quiet pride. When invited to speak, Henry stood slowly and made his way to the stage. Though his voice was softer, it carried the same conviction it always had. "Henry, I never thought I'd get a second chance at life. But one stranger's kindness changed everything for me. I learned that sometimes, even the smallest act of compassion can save a life." He paused, his eyes scanning the room filled with familiar faces and new ones. Henry. Today, I see the faces of people whose stories have been written with hope and perseverance. You are the proof of what I've always believed, that everyone deserves a chance to start over. Taking a deep breath, he concluded, Henry, I may not be here much longer, but I know that all of you will carry this mission forward. And because of that, I leave with no regrets. A few months after the celebration, Henry passed away peacefully in his sleep, a serene smile on his face. News of his passing spread widely, sparking an outpouring of gratitude from those whose lives he had touched. Emma, Linda, and the others who had walked alongside Henry organized a memorial at the First Center. One by one, attendees shared stories of how Henry's vision had changed their lives, reminding everyone of the mission's enduring importance. At the end of the ceremony, a small statue of Henry was unveiled outside the center. Inscribed at its base were the words, "No one is invisible, everyone deserves a chance to start over." As the sun set, its rays illuminated the statue, a poignant reminder that Henry's legacy would live on through the people he had inspired, and the hope he had planted in countless hearts. The story closes here, but Henry's legacy continues, a testament to compassion, resilience, and the profound ability to change the world through small yet meaningful actions. Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Goodbye, and see you in future stories. Thank you.